live in a vast world of animals that shape the environment and are shaped by the environment they live in. What happens when we give a wild dog the power to breathe fire, add in a rampaging sea monster only heard of in legends, and metallic creatures that absorb and release electricity at will? You get the wild and vast world of Pokemon, and I'm here to explain to you how these Pokemon interact with each other and why they live in these environments through the complete ecology of the Kanto region. Howdy there, I'm Curlic, and I'm so excited to go through this video with you today. Now, if you've already seen the Pokemon food chain, I'm going to tell you right now, this is basically going to be an infinitely better version of that, in my opinion, when it comes to information and how this is laid out. My reasoning for this is the fact that I am not limiting myself purely to the Pokédex, meaning there was far more information per Pokemon that I could have gone over, but the Pokédex kind of lies to you, who would have guessed? So, through the use of more than just the Pokédex and not limiting myself, we have so much more and so much more accurate information to go over when we're going through the ecology of the Kanto region. And if this video does well, I would love to do a video like this for each of the regions going forward. So, without further ado, let's actually just get into the video by starting to explain to you what even is ecology. Ecology is the branch of biology that deals with the relations of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. With this, we are going to focus more on Pokemon and their relations. We'll be mostly removing humans from this and focusing more on the natural world, meaning that I'll mention the cities and the man-made structures, as with Pokemon like Meowth, which are affected by humanity or affect humanity by taking coins or whatever else they might do. Other ones include Magnemite and Muck, as it's impossible ultimately to not mention the influence of human settlements on their existence as an extension of their own relations to the natural world. But I will also state I'm not going to be considering ponds that exist within the cities of Pokemon, as they're likely man-made and are not a natural space for Pokemon. This rule will likely change depending on certain locations if I can find that it explicitly states that it was a natural body of water, naturally formed cave, so on and so forth. In addition, we do need to lay down some ground rules to keep this entire thing more realistic and understandable. Otherwise, this is just going to become a massive mess. So, we will primarily base it on the games and supplement our info with Pokédex info or info from the anime, whatever I could pull forth, with my main source, a lot of this information being Bulbapedia. If we decided to consider the anime fully, each anime rendition of some of the routes are different. Some of them even have mountains, while others have ponds, and others just don't have either, only have one of them. And I understand that it could be, oh, you know, you're on different sections of the routes, but when you're starting out at the beginning of the route and it's not showing the same relative thing and there's an entire mountain missing, we need to just fix whatever's going on here, okay? In addition, I am getting my Pokemon frequencies, my percentages, how often they appear, from Fire Red and Leaf Green, which is considered Generation 3 information. This also allows me, by mixing and matching this information, to have the most fleshed out versions of these routes in the region without game design kind of getting in the way from older games that want to try and stick Cricketot into the Viridian Forest or completely skew the percentages of encounters and create vastly different ecosystems than what naturally originally existed. Map descriptions and berry plants info are like brought together through Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games. And lastly, for organizational purposes, we are simply just traveling through Kanto, route by route, in order, for the most part. Any caves or forests we see along the way, we will talk about as we travel through them, so we'll just hit you with a little bit of nostalgia along the way, and let's begin with the general geography of the region itself. But before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you for being here and viewing the video. If you can, become a member to support the channel if you so wish, to additionally support the research that goes into these types of videos and future research that will happen. So, Kanto itself, it's very temperate climate. This basically means temperate climates of the Earth are characterized by relatively moderate mean annual temperatures, with average monthly temperatures above 10 degrees Celsius in their warmest months and above -3 degrees Celsius in their colder months. And because I'm American, that's about 50 degrees and 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Real-life examples of this that I quickly searched up would be Northwestern Europe, Northwestern North America, Southeastern and Southwestern South America, Southeastern Australia, and most of New Zealand. In Kanto, most of the cities are actually at its center, all with close access to basically every single type of environment. All of them with really close access to basically every single type of environment. You're looking at the seas, the mountain, the forest, whatever it might be. Mostly land with a large bay at its southwest. And it has several mountain ranges, with one of the biggest mountain ranges being the one that separates it from Johto. One final note, since these are the Pokemon that naturally occur, we are going to be missing a number of the original 151 Pokemon that do not have actual spawns in Kanto itself. I will talk about some legendaries and some special exceptions that I feel like need to be mentioned that are involved with the ecosystem itself, and they will likely be brought up again in future generations when they appear. Beginning with Route 1, it is a country road full of greenery and rough paths from Pallet Town to Viridian City. Black apricorns and raspberries can be found here. And I didn't realize, I mean, I get it, apricorn, apricot, acorn, like, I get it. But my brain, for some reason, didn't think that Pokemon itself considered apricorns an actual fruit. They are actually mostly irrelevant until they spoil, as Pokemon can't digest unspoiled apricorns. Otherwise, it is suggested that any Pokemon that isn't just an obligate carnivore would just eat these, and who knows, maybe they would still eat them if they absolutely had to. We'll also say raspberries in real life, or at least their bushes, provide a lot of undergrowth coverage for small animals such as birds and mice, for example. Though the seedless fruits that would exist elsewhere would probably just be better energy for birds. But speaking of small animals, what do we have here? We have Pidgeys and Rattatas, our birds and our mice. It actually makes sense, and it's usually when I'm in the early writing process of all of this that I'm like, okay, is this actually gonna work? And when I read this and I ran it through and, you know, try to use what knowledge I do have and what I have been taught, it lines up. It's already lining up, and I'm excited to continue. So, Pidgey is our common bird, and likely preys on our Rattata as a normal bird would. It also likely eats the raspberries as the supplementary food. They both have like a relatively even encounter rate, and Rattata, on the other hand, is known to just eat anything it can get its hands on, even if it's rotten. So, pretty simple for our first route. We have a nice little picture of the little Rattatas scurrying through the bushes. Maybe they're hiding inside of the raspberry bushes, especially when it gets cold. They're able to stay warm in collections of raspberry bushes, and our birds, they might have migrated, but when it gets warm again and everyone's moving around, there are plenty of Rattata, as they usually move in swarms, for our Pidgeys to swoop in and try to take one of them. Otherwise, they just supplement again. They just eat what they can, whether it's raspberries or anything else that's not a named fruit in the Pokemon games. Now, as we move on to future routes, if/when we get to, you know, Pokemon we've already talked about, I will name them, but if there's no new ecological speculation for me to state, then I'll just continue on to the next Pokemon immediately, as I want to try and streamline this as best as I can. In other cases, they might have ecological information, but I might be waiting until the end, and I will remind you of that route, in order for me to paint a proper full picture for you, rather than making small assumptions along the way. Moving on to Route 2, a path that bends from the forest's entrance. Now, this does connect Pewter City and Diglett's Cave, but you have to get through Viridian Forest in order to get to Pewter. Now, we'll also save Diglett's Cave for later, because it doesn't really have any real effect or direct effect on this area. Now, when we look at it, there are far more trees, there's a higher tree density, it's really nice for a number of different creatures, great for birds, it's a great coverage, and really, when I say it's great for birds, it allows them, when they're flying or migrating or moving around, to find themselves a nice place to rest. Alternatively, birds will sit in the edge lines of trees because what happens when it's morning time, maybe it just rained and the sunlight is up, the worms are going to come up. Perfect time for the birds to come down. Maybe there's other animals moving through in the open plains and the grasslands, and they're not going to move through the forest itself. That means that these birds sitting in the tree line have the perfect opportunity to stay safe, relatively, assuming there aren't any bigger birds in the area, while also being able to keep an eye out for their next meal. Now, there are a few thick grass patches and less like properly mowed, almost quote-unquote looking mowed down areas in between, and there are some Pokemon that wander out from Viridian Forest itself that we will talk about. We do get our common Pokemon of Pidgey and Rattata again. Their diet is now expanded with the Pokemon wandering from Viridian Forest. Those Pokemon are actually Caterpie and Weedle. Now, of course, the two games, Fire Red and Leaf Green, do have different spawn rates, but I am mashing it all together as we're not going to focus on exact percentages, but use them as a guideline. I will be naming percentages here and there, being like, oh, this one's 30%, so this one definitely has the highest of all the encounters that are here, but again, it's a general guideline. This is also how I speculate that these two bug Pokemon are wandering out of the forest rather than actually living outside of the forest. We see the rate appearance at about 45% for Pidgey and Rattata each, and then Caterpie and Weedle would just be about at 5% each, based on the numbers. Meaning that, for some reason, they are leaving the forest, being relatively found here often enough that we can actually state that when trainers are going through the rough patches of grass, you have a chance of encountering one of these two bug Pokemon, and they serve as supplementary prey for our bird and our rat, mouse, purple thing. Though something we will run into often that I found incredibly strange is that there's this really weird skewing of prey population versus predator population. In the real world, you would typically get less predators than you would prey in an entire given area. This is because the more prey that there are, the more food there is for predators. This in turn drives up their population. So let's take a small tangent in order to explain this better. Let's say there's more sunlight in an area. This in turn would mean that there's more vegetation generally, assuming the proper conditions. Now, more vegetation means more food for animals such as deer, squirrels, mice, so on and so forth. This actually drives up their population, assuming there's enough space and water in this area, and as such, because they realize they have all of their natural resources that they need, they will have more children, or rather, more children will survive in these areas. Now that we have an increase of our prey population, let's throw a predator in. Let's literally just throw in a wolf. So the wolves now have more food since they eat all these other prey creatures that exist in the area because their population grew because of the increase in vegetation. More vegetation, more herbivores or prey animals, I suppose, in this exact case, more predators, more wolf in this case. This, in turn, would increase this wolf population, assuming all the other factors are good to go. But let's say they eat too much, or humans intervene, or there's a cataclysmic event where a meteor comes, I don't know, whatever it is. Something that only affects the prey somehow, right? So the prey being affected, their population begins to go down. Well, that's your food source, Mr. Wolf. As such, Mr. Wolf and his family start to die off. Wow, that's really dark. I'm so sorry. Either way, the population of wolves either A, die off in the area, or B, the number of them in the area decrease because they have to move. They have to leave because they don't have the natural resources that they need. And this is the general basic cycle that exists everywhere. And as a many tangents from our tangents, wolves are super complicated. I hyper generalize them. We've been studying wolves for like so long as a human species, and I say so long, I actually don't know off the top of my head. I think we've only been studying them properly for the last 20 or 30 years. I highly recommend checking into Greenfire by Aldo Leopold. Beautiful. Anything by Aldo Leopold. Beautiful works. Beautiful works if you want to read anything. Natural resources or anything like that. Had to read it in college. Great time. Hit me right in the heart. It's one of the best things to start off with. But yes, wolves, maybe the last 20 or 30 years. I'm not 100% sure. I highly recommend just fact-checking me on that one. What's more important is the fact that we're still studying them because we really have no complete picture of how they affect the environment. I used wolves because, I don't know, they're big old puppos. They're huge. They're massive. Oh my gosh. But, back to the main topic. You can apply this general cycle that exists to pretty much every ecosystem that exists. Plants, prey, predator, and then your detrivores just get all the good scraps. As always, something is just kind of left behind. So, the ground flourishes, plants renew, and you repeat the cycle. Back to Pokemon. So hopefully with that explanation, you can see why so few prey makes this a very strange situation. And we're going to see this time and time again. And my only explanation for this area is that the Pidgey are primarily feeding on the Rattata still, and the Rattata are primarily feeding on whatever vegetation or rotted fruit or whatever else that exists in the area, and our bugs are just supplemental to their diets. They could also just be leaving the area to go get food and then come back. This is just general population, like nesting, for example. This is just where they live. So they could be leaving and coming back for their food. There's nothing saying that they don't. The only other options I really had to making that assumption was to try and take the numbers we have and just twist them, make them more realistic so that there isn't game balance and that there's instead a more ecologically sound population percentage per given area. But I really just did not want to punch that hard into numbers when I could explain things the way I just did. It makes it better and more accessible to not only myself, but you. And we're just gonna, again, use those percentages as general guidelines, and I'm not going to take them at verbatim, as some areas will just have a plethora of Pokemon, and balancing all those numbers is just gonna be nigh impossible. And realistically speaking, real surveys need to be done in areas over the period of years at a time in order to properly document that type of information for it to be really accurate, which is pretty much impossible unless one of you wants to hand off a Porygon that I can just go right into the virtual world in. So we work with what we have, and we're going to use what real life information that we have at our disposal to structure future areas as best as we can, as we did with this one. Have I expressed how much I'm loving this, by the way? This is really what I studied. This is like almost pretty much exactly what I studied in college for a while and did some field work with. So this is fun. This is amazing, and I'm in love with this. So let's not gush too much right now. I will certainly gush more later on, and let's jump to Viridian Forest, a deep sprawling forest that extends around Viridian City and is known to be a natural maze. I don't know why my brain immediately made me think of like drawing the maze, like the SpongeBob, like. Anywho, It's a deep sprawling woodland with trees that are so dense that the light actually has trouble getting through, making it very dark and gloomy. Now, the thick canopy actually means that there's much less floor greenery depending on the section that you are in. Again, we go back to less light, less greenery on the ground. Those trees are sucking up all that sunlight and really competing with each other as they're growing taller than each other. Now, the entrance isn't as thick in terms of those canopies, and so we have more grass to work with, or the tall grass to work with, and otherwise the grass is unmaintained. Who would have guessed? It's a forest. Now, people do get lost in here, and they are going to be dropping items. I'm not going to talk about, oh, Mr. Johnny Two Shoes over there ended up dropping a potion. I don't care. That doesn't really affect what we have here. Sure, it's a little bit of litter. Unfortunately, that's going to damage an animal or two, or hundreds down the line of years of decay, or whatever the heck ends up happening. I don't know how potions are made in Pokemon. Ah, crap, that's another video. But in the forest, we find Caterpie and Weedle in large numbers. Now, though, we do also have Metapod, which is unmoving, but living in groups trying to survive until they evolve, and Kakuna is added to this, who's roughly the same, but hangs from tree branches via long strands of silk. Now, it is very strange that we don't have Butterfree or Beedrill. This could just simply mean that they move elsewhere after hatching, as we've seen happen in the anime. And yes, I know, Heart Gold Soul Silver has them, but that's also late game and changes a number of other spawns and factors through the interest of game design primarily. Ultimately, I will at least state here that Butterfree does go after honey and pollen. It slathers honey onto its legs to carry it around, and then Beedrill, what does Beedrill do? Okay, so Beedrill does do what I expected, and also creates honey as a normal bee would, and protects both Weedle and Kakuna, as it's very concerned with their well-being and welfare. Now, before I explain how all of that fits together, we also get this little 5% chance of seeing a Pikachu, which is known to eat plenty of berries, roasting them with electricity. Now, mice and rats can eat insects, but Pikachu just doesn't really show any evidence of this or interest in this from what I'm able to find. And they're a rare find in the forest, assumedly they have no regular predators. But when we look at the overall ecosystem of this, we have a nice dark area where both Weedle and Caterpie are able to move about living their life. They live rather separately because Beedrill are very aggressive of their territory, and as such will likely just shrink anything that comes near their babies. Understandably so. So, you get them separately, rarely interacting with each other. Now, when you look at Weedle and Caterpie, they are just eating a bunch of leaves. They're larvae, so they're eating leaves, and I know some, to my knowledge, there are larvae that will eat other bugs, depending on what type. Like, I know dragonfly larvae, those are sick looking. They will eat other bugs. But these two, they're eating their leaves. They eventually, get their chrysalis, so they're turning into Metapod or Kakuna. For the Metapods, they're going to try and stick together, so they're going to have 4, 5, 6, however many they can, to stay together in like this cluster, so that way they hopefully have a higher chance of having at least one of them survive an attack if it happens. So then they could become Butterfree and leave this area to better pastures where they could go collect pollen. Then when we transfer over to Kakuna, hanging from the trees, we've seen it in the anime, there are so many of them, they're terrifying, and eventually they will crack open and turn into Beedrill, which will likely just actually be around the area in order to protect the newborn young. Pikachu, on, the rare occasion that it wanders through, will go grab berries maybe, live its life. It might run into an encounter or two of this, and on an incredibly rare occasion, I have to at least mention that when Pikachu are gathered together, there's a high chance that like a thunderstorm may occur, or lightning will strike in that area, so there's always the chance that a wildfire may kaboom into Viridian Forest because of that rare number of Pikachu actually staying together, finding each other, and they're roasting their berries, and then, you know, bad things happen, unfortunately. And it's not their fault. I mean, technically it is, but they're not doing it on purpose. So there's our little picture of Viridian Forest. Before we jump into Route 3, how does this look? I'm not wearing my coat, I just realized. Either way, I'll put the coat on in a moment. I drank some tea and my back was itching. But how does this look? I like my framework right here. I'm not moving around as much. And at least if I ever have to actually sit down for a video, which I know you guys like me jumping around and everything, but if I have to sit down for a video because maybe my office changed and I'm in a smaller space or anything like that, I can at least work with it. And hopefully you're getting better audio quality. You're hearing less of me going, you know, and stuff like that. Or at least in general, you shouldn't be hearing my breathing as much because I just talk so much and breathe so little. There's an example right there if you heard the breath. And you really shouldn't be hearing any of, like, if I end up talking too long without drinking any water, you shouldn't be hearing me, you know? So hopefully I've increased our audio quality, as my goal is to always try to improve the quality of these videos. More specifically, the sound, because a lot of you just kind of listen to the video more than you do just watch it. But I'm going to put the coat back on, and we're going to go into Route 3. Just let me know in the comments what you think. Route 3, a road where many rocks have fallen from the sky to create craters. We usually just call those meteors, Pokemon. Thank you. But orange berries can be found here, assuming they do grow here, because it doesn't say that there was an orange berry plant, but Raz and Nanab berries have shown to grow here, though that is the influence of Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu, and Eevee. I'm going to be trying to keep the Raz and Nanab berries when they appear, but I'm not going to talk about if silver, gold, or whatever the heck the variations of those appear, if they appear, whatever. I feel like that gets away from what I said earlier, the original idea of let's try and keep this as close to Generation 1 as possible while having more fleshed out information. Now, Pokemon here include Pidgey and Spearow. Spearow is very dominant and aggressive, eats plenty of bugs, and the only thing is there are no bug Pokemon here. Originally, I thought that this may just be because Spearow just nests here, but I looked into it further and found out that Spearow is not only based off of a sparrow, or the general sparrow, but also off of something called the shrike. Now, both of these creatures do eat plenty of bugs, but some shrikes, eat other birds and small mammals. So there is the chance that they're not only eating Pidgey, but the next Pokemon I'm going to mention. Nidoran male and Nidoran female. Female uses its keen sense of smell to find berries and avoid predators, though its poison quills provide it with a defensive procedure. Now, the male, on the other hand, uses its well-developed ears instead of its nose. It also uses its horn to fight back and does anything to protect the female Nidoran. So they're also apparently very brave, and I imagine that if they're hunted down by a Spearow, potentially even a Pidgey, they're going to try and fight back. My initial reasoning for this is that they do have some basis in being rabbits of some kind. I mean, let's look at their evolutions later on. They evolved via moonstone, moon rabbit. It's a thing in Japan. Now, let's talk about the next one, being Jigglypuff. There's no evidence of Jigglypuff's diet, but I'm just gonna at least say that it eats the berries in the area. And it also puts any threats to sleep as its form of self-defense. It would make sense as to why it gets so angry every single time somebody doesn't fall asleep to its song. Or, well, actually it does. They do fall asleep in the anime, where that Jigglypuff does get angry. I don't know. The whole thing becomes a funny little mess. It's fun. Anywho, it is also the balloon Pokemon, comprised mostly of air. I don't know if that means it has very little organs. Maybe it doesn't have organs. I don't know. We don't know the inside of a Jigglypuff, but I'm going to assume it has organs and is biological to some degree, but that it might be a lot of air inside of it somehow, that might comprise, you know, let's say 70% of it, because we've had fire Pokemon that don't have actual blood. They are fire and lava and magma, so who's to say Jigglypuff doesn't fit along those lines for air? I'll let you decide. Ultimately, if it's the balloon Pokemon and it's mostly air, I question if anything actually tries to eat it and it just gets pushed out of other Pokemon's territories. The last one in this area goes out to Mankey, shown to be fond of bananas in the anime but prefers chestnuts. The problem is they don't have the dexterity that they need in order to actually crack open the chestnuts appropriately, and because they can't crack that chestnut open, they end up getting really angry and fly into a rage. So it likely just eats the nat-nat berries in the area and gets attacked by the birds, as Mankey also lives in trees, taking away from one of their food sources. This picture is a very, like, you know, it's more like a sketch on this one. There's not a lot of extra information. You get Pidgey and Spearow, who might be fighting each other because Spearow wants to use Pidgey as its own meal. They could be competing for the Nidoran male and Nidoran female in the area as they try to live their lives feeding off of berries and existing. I do know that evolutions of Nidoran male at least show that they do eat meat, but Nidoran female doesn't show that, or at least their evolutions don't. So that's a little bit of a strange one. We're just going to assume at this point in their lives they are just digesting a lot of berries, which is more akin to rabbits eating a lot of vegetables and everything like that. And we're not going to apply lizard knowledge to them. And when I say lizard knowledge, I mean like when you have a lizard, depending on the lizard, you know, like I had a bearded dragon, and at first I was instructed to feed it more protein when I was younger, but still have that balance of food. But as I got older, I believe I had to feed it less protein. It's been a couple years, so I might be saying that wrong. But as I got older, it wasn't growing as much, and so it just needed some good supplements and did not need as much protein. Jigglypuff, on the other hand, though, for this area, again, not really existing, not really doing much. Maybe a Mankey comes in and punches it, man. Maybe it just sends it to the stars. It's a normal type Pokemon. It doesn't stand a chance. And Mankey doesn't... What? It has... Actually, Mankey has, isn't it Vital Spirit that stops a Pokemon from falling asleep, now that I think about it? So that actually makes perfect sense. A Jigglypuff might be walking around in the area, taking a berry. A Mankey walks right in, you know, is really angry that his food is being taken, and just... Bah! Gone. So, again, more of a sketch than a full picture. Mount Moon, a mystical mountain that is known for its frequent meteor falls. The shards of stars that fall here are known as moonstones. It is apparently abundant with fossils. Now, when we look at Mount Moon, the caves are a great place, and caves in real life are a great place of warmth when the outside gets too cold. Of course, this does depend on the cave, of course, and its depth. Now, when we look at Mount Moon's caves, or at least this cave in Mount Moon, there are tiny and big mushrooms here due to moisture and temperature. Different floors hold a different Pokemon because of heat, pressure, and moisture. Typically, in real life, the deeper you go, the more heat and pressure there is. Now, one fun little thing is that you can go incredibly deep, I mean like kilometers or miles deep, into the ground, and you'll find massive, I mean like, I'm not over-exaggerating. I know I am like, woo, all over the place, but I'm not over-exaggerating when I say massive quartz crystals, bigger than a person, underground. And I'll try to throw a picture here if I can find a good one. But there are people that have to put on what look like hazmat suits, and in reality, they are thermoregulation kind of suit things, because when you go deeper into the ground like that, what are you doing? You're getting into a more pressurized environment, but the pressure is negligent. Instead, you're getting closer to the core. And even just by going a couple of miles, and because of just where some of these caves are located, you get that heat and that pressure and the moisture and everything to the point where it's over 100 degrees in these sections of caves where the quartz is being created. So you have to wear these suits or you're going to die. It's crazy. It's amazing. Part of me would love to do that. I will never get that opportunity. But it would be so cool to see these giant quartz crystals in person. They're amazing. I love it. Let's get back to, I went off on a tangent without realizing it. I got excited. Let's go back as we're going to talk about the Pokemon that start on the first floor. Now, Zubat here is the most common. I'm sure you already knew that. Now, they use echolocation and are actually blind, unlike real bats. They are nocturnal still, though, as sunlight actually ends up burning Zubat's skin. Though, we'll talk about training them. If they are trained, they can become resistant to sunlight. That's some fantasy vampire stuff going on right there. I couldn't find any information directly on their diet, but if they're anything like their evolutions, then they feed primarily, if not solely, on blood. And there are a couple of strict blood-feeding vampire bats that do exist. I forgot to mention it earlier, but I do have my sources in the description below, outside of the ones that are Bulbapedia or what I know I learned directly from my time in college. Actually, that brings me to a point, and I feel like it's important, because I mentioned it in the food chain video, and if you watch the food chain video, odds are you are here as well. There is a animal called the European moth. I'm not even going to say the word again. It starts with a G. That is an invasive species. Its name is now the spongy moth because the G word is a really bad word. Initially, because it was part of its actual name, I thought, oh, that isn't related. Maybe it should be fine. Everything's okay. That is its actual name. But over time, yeah, that's not an okay word. So I apologize for that. That is what I was being taught in college 3 years ago still. So that's still on me. That is not an excuse. That is still on me, as I should have kept up with relevant current information. So, spongy moth, invasive species, blah, 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 blah. Now, back to not talking about my sources, but into the actual subject. That was really awkward. So, with the vampire bats, they were studied for a really long time trying to figure out, like, okay, blood is not super duper nutritious, and you'd have to drink an excessive amount of blood in order to actually be able to survive. But if you're drinking that much blood, then you are increasing the iron count in your body by deadly levels because of just the amount of iron that's in our blood. So how are vampire bats getting the nutrition that they need and not dying if they're solely surviving off of blood? Now, the article that I do have in the description below does talk about it further, and it's really fascinating. But ultimately, the genes that they have are kind of around. Like, they're different. They're built different. So they just get to be fine. They'll be okay. Without getting into the nitty-gritty details of all of that, that would take me another 15 minutes to really talk about. So, the high and low of it is, their DNA is different. It allows them to feed without having to worry, though they do have to feed every night to ensure their own survival. I will also state that the Zubat probably only nest here, as real bats mostly would, and fly out to feast at night. That's just what they do. So, I can also support this because of what else exists in these caves. One of them being Geodude. The only diet data that is stated for Geodude is that it rolls down the mountains to search for food. Now, I will talk about it later as to why I can support what I'm about to say, but initially I had thought maybe it just eats veggies, which would grow abundantly at the bottom of, let's say, one side of the mountain. But that it could also be searching for minerals that have been ground out from rolling rocks from the top of the mountain. Now, when we look at its evolutions, Graveler does state, and I'll remind you of this later, that it eats rocks and its favorite kind are ones covered in moss. Don't know why, which is a really interesting thing, and maybe I could look into that for when I talk about all rock Pokemon one day. But we can assume that Geodude is doing the same thing, at least eating those ground up rocks and minerals, and then really searching for those rocks that have a little bit of moss on them for that spongy, tasty treat that it so desires. Otherwise, I highly doubt Geodude is really being eaten here, let alone most other locations. Next, we move on to Paris. The Tochukaso parasitic mushrooms control it and tell it to drain nutrients from tree roots. They're often found in caves and thrive in damp forests, which is likely due to heat and moisture, which makes sense why they're in these caves. As long as Paris eats, the mushrooms extract nutrients. Now, there could be some roots here in the cave, or it could just use the cave as shelter with the extra moisture and overall favorable conditions, allowing those mushrooms to really thrive and grow just a little bit extra. Honestly, the cave feels full of prey with no true predators, unless Zubat is fully draining Paris, for example, which isn't impossible, but it just doesn't seem like that's what it would do. I would imagine that when we look at some parasitic fungus or creatures in general, where their bodies have been infected by an outside source, there are some cases, to my knowledge, where, yeah, you don't want to eat that, first off, actually. I know that for a fact. Look at the zombie, quote-unquote zombie, bugs that have existed and the zombie fungus that infects them. It's only gonna hurt you. So if you were a Zubat that lived in a cave, saw one of your brethren go down, bite a Paris, and over the next couple of days he's starting to grow fungus on his body, yeah, I wouldn't bite that Paris either. Also, that's a really sick, like, potential Pokemon design right there. I want to see the Zubat line, but covered in, like, the fungus, being just this disgusting monster that no longer flies. Maybe it does a little bit when it becomes Golbat, if it, you know, if it was a Golbat. But, like, when it's a Zubat, now it crawls along the ground like some just disgusting little monster. I don't know. The ideas are out there. My brain just went, woo! So, I couldn't stop myself. But, let's talk about the last and rarest Pokemon on this specific floor, being Clefairy, the invasive species from space that dances at night and drinks water in the morning. Otherwise, it just sleeps. So either they don't eat, they only eat plants, or somehow they get nutrients from just water and moonlight. They're hyper friendly as well. I think of what are they called? Koakas, the ones that live on an island with no actual predators, so they're super friendly and smiley and happy. Yeah, so at this point, I'm very sorry, and I don't mean to offend when I say this, but no matter what anybody says at this point, it makes zero sense to weigh the fact that they have a pointy tooth like your little anime crush over all this information and call it a predator. I'm sorry. I don't care that it has front-facing eyes. How many Pokemon have front-facing eyes and are not predators? How many Pokemon might have pointy teeth but are not predators? Sometimes you just need to rip and tear Doom style into a nice piece of celery. I don't know, man. So, ultimately, I am stating here and now and forever, Clefairy does not eat meat. They don't have natural predators because they're invasive, and they know how to defend themselves. Please, try to go after a colony of Clefairy. The anime proved why you shouldn't, and it scared the heck out of me. Oh no, they're doing metronome. Oh no, they're doing metronome. Run! Run! No. Oh god, oh no, run. Oh, everything's over. They're gonna blow up the planet. I've never seen that many use dual metronome at the same time. Jesus Christ! I wasn't ready to see 20 different Clefairy use their little metronome and cause the world's next cataclysmic volcanic eruption. So, unless you want to end the world, you better leave the Clefairy alone and they just get to exist freely. The insanity is starting to set in and it's only been about 40 minutes of recording. Oh no. Going into Basement 1F, it's just Paris in here. This might actually be because the area is the warmest with the least potential conflict with other Pokemon. So, the two combinations of what it would want the most. Could also be, if I remember correctly, B1F is just the shortest area that you can go into. So maybe because it has such a small area but still has that warmth, the additional, the addition that happens is more moisture, less open air, more heat, and then of course again, less Pokemon that aren't Paris in the area. It just becomes very favorable for a Pokemon that's just a mushroom. Now, when we get into B2F, the rate of Zubat decrease and the rate of the rest of the Pokemon in the caves increase. Now, that could be because maybe Zubat truly does cause conflict with the other cave Pokemon. Now, I would expect it to attack Paris and Clefairy at least here and there, but not regularly enough. Maybe it doesn't even actually try to drain blood. Maybe it just, you know, antagonizes them. I see red-winged blackbirds all the time bothering other birds, hawks, ducks, everything. They don't really eat them, to my knowledge. So they just, you know, they're jerks. Now, we also know that Zubat does attack in swarms. So ultimately, less Zubat, more other Pokemon. And there's not much of a picture to paint here. The Zubat just get to exist. The Geodudes are, you know, laying down, pretending to be rocks, come out at night or during the day whenever they feel like it to just eat some eat rocks. Clefairy just wanders around the caves on occasion from, you know, the top of Mount Moon, and Paris is trying to hide away as best as it can, eating what it can, and I'm trying to grow the Tochikaso mushrooms that are on its body. Route 4, a one-way road down a hill that has a gentle slope and is fun to traverse. Now, there are Persim, Raz, and Nanab berries here. Why do it feels weird saying Nanab? Nanab? Nanab. Nanab. Banana. Nananab. Brain hurt. Anywho, we also find Rattata, Mankey, and Sparrow here once again. But now we get to add a few new prey and predators on both land and the water. The burrowing Sandshrew. It enjoys bug Pokemon, but let's look at Shrew's overall, since it just apparently states that it only loves bug Pokemon. Shrews, I found out, eat insects, earthworms, centipedes, millipedes, snails, mollusks, frogs, and carrion. Thank you, Pennsylvania Game Commission. Now, here's where I had to make a decision again as we step away from Sandshrew, because there are a number of different ways that you can encounter Pokemon in the water: surfing, Old Rod, Good Rod, Super Rod. All massively changes the encounter spawns. And yes, I understand that depending on the rod you're using, maybe you're getting deeper in the water, maybe you're getting further out, whatever it might be. Nevertheless, ecologically, unless the pond has a massive secret tunnel or connects to the sea, it doesn't quite make sense in the areas that some of these ponds are in. Especially as Magikarp I consider to be a bottom feeder, and they really just are bottom feeders based on all the information that we have and what they are based on. So, using a Super Rod and having a 0% chance to catch one does not logically line up at all. Unless everything else is killing them, which still doesn't make sense because there's lots of Magikarp everywhere. So, also wanted to support my decision that I'm going to tell you by using Pokemon within a level range completely within the range of the Pokemon that are found on land in the grass at the time that you are first entering the area. So again, no matter what I do, this is a hard call, and I'm gonna make these hard calls multiple times based on what I believe would make sense for these areas. Unless you want a Horsey to suffer in a small pond without coral to hide in as it prefers. Which, yes, if you used any other rod, you would get a Horsey here, which does not line up. So, I argue Magikarp are the only one in this pond. They are carp, and as such are bottom feeders as stated. They are pretty to creatures like, wait, what? That's not the word. What the heck? My typo. It's supposed to be prey. They are prey to creatures like Pidgeotto, so we can assume that other Pokemon will eat them, and Spearow will likely hunt them as well. Rattata can likely swim considering its evolution. Raticate has webbed feet, so maybe Rattata hunt down Magikarp as well, having developed that trait early on before its full-on evolution. Otherwise, Rattata just eats the berries and scraps of that Spearow leaves behind, just as Sandshrew would. But the top dog of this area would be Ekans, who without a doubt would try to eat any of the Pokemon here given the chance. Though if it eats too much, it'll become immobile and may actually end up being eaten by Spearow. I will also note that Shrew might also eat Ekans, or sorry, our Sandshrew might end up eating Ekans, because the idea that Shrews eat small snakes, and I mean, Sandshrew and Ekans are relative enough in size, and you have a ground type and a poison type, I am fairly sure that the two of them get into conflicts quite often and will end up trying to eat each other. I'm not going to paint a full picture of this area because we get a better and more detailed picture with evolutions of these Pokemon in future areas. Route 5, a placid sloping road connecting to the underground path. Raz and Nana berries grow here, and the hierarchy rearranges itself as Pidgey is still here, but we have 3 new Pokemon now. Oddish walks around at night as it burns in direct sunlight and grows in the moonlight. It plants itself in nutrient-rich areas with its feet and grows. So, I'm gonna say right now it is bottom of the chain in this area and is likely eaten by Pidgey to start. Now, we're not going to be talking, like, there's no... Alright, here's now that you're an hour or so into this, I don't know what it's going to look like after editing, probably about 42 minutes. But, if I nailed that, I'll be really proud of myself. But, food chains are really, actually not great, okay? Because it's really unrealistic to state that this Pokemon will literally only ever eat this one thing, okay? It also states that the prey will never try and will never eat the predator, which in some cases, of course, that might be the actual case. A deer never gonna eat a wolf, and I swear if there's an article out there saying that a deer hunted a wolf, that we're done. It's over. It's got vampiric deer disease BS. I don't want to go anywhere near there. Aren't there vampire deers? Deers? Whatever. I need to control these thoughts of mine. Ultimately, a food chain actually isn't great. Food webs are nice. They're a little bit better. It shows, like, how it all courses around. And it's also why, when I made that video, I knew that there were going to be mistakes. I knew that there was going to be weird stuff that could be argued, left, right, and center. We have proof and evidence of animals that only eat grass, quote-unquote only eat grass, or stuff like that, and berries, eating and hunting actual live creatures. A tortoise or turtle ate a bird. There's goats that have eaten birds. So on and so forth. These are rare scenarios where they have to do what they have to do to get their nutrients. But let's talk about Bellsprout, who's next. It does use acid and wants to wrap up anything that moves to capture it as prey. That acid will break down the Pokemon that it sprays it on. It states that it eats bugs, but I would not be surprised if it eats any Pokemon that it can get its roots on. It could also just corrode down with that acid. It also does dig its roots deep into the ground for water, which would mean that this Pokemon is drought resistant. That's because when water levels go down, because there's not a lot of rain, those plants with deeper roots are still able to get water. This also hurts other plants in the area and increases its own survival, because it means that, let's say you have a plant here that has super deep roots. It's going to go super deep into the ground and pick up water that the other plants aren't. So let's say these have short roots. These die off. This one, even as more water comes in, is still taking that water, making it so maybe not all of the other plants in the area that have shorter roots can get the water that they need. They, again, die off. And now you have this plant with super deep roots that are able to then have more of itself and create a monoculture. Basically, a culture or area where there is only one species, one creature, one Bellsprout. Bada bing, bada boom. Fun stuff. The last one in this area, as per new additions, is Meowth. It loves coins and sparkly things, wandering the city for them, and even sleeps on the coins themselves. This route is between two cities, after all, and while there are many routes that are technically between two cities, every time I talk about Meowth that happens, and I lean into it, it is a shorter route between two cities. I need to restate that sentence for you. So while there are many routes that are technically between two cities, this one is shorter between the two cities. Meaning that this Meowth is likely able to just go from one city to the next, get the coins, maybe go back to the other one, whatever happens. You know what I mean? Now, they are playful, fickle, and have a high intelligence. Meowth itself is nocturnal, and cats themselves are obligate carnivores, and Meowth does explicitly state it hunts for prey. Sorry, the thought of, every time I say obligate carnivore, I've seen so many cats that chew on bark and everything like that, and that's not them eating it. That's just, you know, that's for whatever reasons that they need. Maybe they're grinding down teeth. I don't know. I didn't research that, so I'm not going to claim anything there. Just I've seen cats eat so many plants and everything like that, but they're not really doing it for sustenance. It's like they're doing it because they're curious or because they're stupid and want to eat a cactus. I don't know, man. So, going back to Meowth, though, it likely just eats Pidgey, as I argue that most grass Pokemon, not all, but most grass-type Pokemon are just fully sentient plants. That is a video I will do one day, where I talk about all grass Pokemon and plant sentience. But October's coming up, so, I might have something else in mind. But I will state at least that Pidgey could be eating our two plants, and Bellsprout might even try to eat all of the Pokemon here, except for Oddish, especially as we don't really see any bug Pokemon here. Ultimately, though, Oddish just gets to absorb nutrients from the ground as a primary source of its food, so when everything dies, it just works as a normal plant, and hopefully it can wander off running away on its two little root feet and escape. Also, it's one of the only Pokemon, if not the only Pokemon, that has a Latin name. I'm not going to talk about that here, but language in Pokemon and the history of language is very interesting when you look at it with a magnifying glass. So this is actually the only time that two routes will be out of order, because for some reason, they decided that routes 24 and 25 would be north of Cerulean. And I typed this after being just one step away from getting to Victory Road, so I was done with the script! And I had to go back and write this, so tired script writing version of Acrylic is called the shots, and basically said this has to go here, and that I have to express his exhaustion and frustration here. So, 24 crosses the waterway via the famous Nugget Bridge just north of Cerulean City, and 25, a path that winds through the forest and comes out overlooking the sea. Not much of a forest when we compare it to Viridian. Now, luckily, they have the same spawns. Caterpie, Caterpie, Metapod, Weedle, Kakuna, Pidgey, Oddish, Bellsprout. Pokemon rap, I can feel it in my spleen. Now, though, we do have one extra Pokemon added to this, and that's going to be Abra, who honestly just eats berries and otherwise doesn't contribute to the ecosystem. Effectively, at least. It just teleports away if there's danger, which it can sense pretty freaking easily. So, yeah, sure, if somehow, you know, maybe Pidgey gets its beak on it, or Bellsprout somehow gets close enough, sure, maybe, just maybe they eat an Abra. But I just don't see it happening, and this ecosystem is wildly untouched. Now, I'm sure if Bellsprout tried to eat all of our bugs, it's gonna get some kickback from Kakuna, because it's gonna try and eat all of our bugs. It explicitly states that it wants to eat bug-type Pokemon. But Kakuna also has a little needle in its chest that it can just kind of beep you with. So, I mean, the only problem with that, it's poison points. Bellsprout is a poison grass-type Pokemon. It's not going to be very effective. So if Bellsprout really wants to, it's going to eat that Kakuna. Meanwhile, Caterpie and Weedle will likely still have their moments where they can get the upper hand and eat Bellsprout instead as they hunt for food so that they can eventually evolve. So it's kind of a real back and forth battle going on here between a lot of these Pokemon where Pidgey just kind of, you know, swoops in, it gets its meal, and it moves on. Unfortunately, though, Oddish just has a lot of predators here. So it can only just hope that it can run at night, far away as it can, and then dig itself into the ground near the stream banks for any nutrient-rich sediment that gets deposited on Route 24. I will also state, Magikarp is also here, but just kind of gets to exist rent-free. I mean, yeah, sure, the Pidgey might come in and grab it, but otherwise there's no additional extra predators to worry about. And honestly, Pidgey might just be plenty distracted by all the other prey that maybe it doesn't need to go after the fish as often unless it needs a nice fatty meal. Route 6, a road linking Saffron and Vermilion City. Now, we do have some of the same Pokemon as before that we talked about before routes 24 and 25 decided to get in. But we also have citrus berries here, so Pidgey gets to eat those. Once again, though, as a reminder, because of how spawns work in the water between Surfing, Old Rod, Good Rod, and Super Rod, I am making a call based on what makes sense for the area and gives a fair variation as it fits within the ecosystem according to my knowledge, understanding, and belief. Okay? So, Magikarp is back, which will add Meowth as a predator of. But we also have Goldeen, which states that it is common in any freshwater, breeds in the spring, and is aggressive even to its own kind. Little fancy tail that it is, little beta. Now, it is partially based on Tusakeen, which are omnivores, apparently. They may just attack and eat anything that enters their territory, speaking on Goldeen, for that matter. Then we have Poliwag. Now, Poliwag is a pure tadpole. It is the tadpole Pokemon. When we look at frogs will eat bugs. They will eat, like, mice and everything like that. But when we look at pure tadpoles, they're eating, like, pond scum, vegetation, and moss. Which, Poliwag being a pure tadpole, is likely only going to eat those things until it evolves. Moss is potentially extra supported with that then, as Poliwag is said to cling to rocks with its lips, which might not just be for eating moss, but actually might be for safety, since it kind of just has its tail and legs, and I don't know exactly how fast it can swim. It is likely eaten by Pidgey and Meowth, and if it gets the chance, especially during the daytime, it might try to eat Oddish. And then there's the very rare chance that it might try to eat Bellsprout, but I don't imagine that would go well for it. So, the other thing about Oddish is that apparently it's very much like a, what is that thing? There's that thing, a mandrake. It's a mandrake, where they're in the ground, and if you pull them up, it just, you know, it screams. It does its thing. So, apparently that's also what Oddish is. So, it might spook Poliwag and actually run back. I would actually, ultimately though, even say that there's a chance Bellsprout would actively try to eat Poliwag whenever it gets onto land, because Poliwag does run back to the water to escape any predators that may be after it. Again, I'm holding off on some picture painting because we have more complete versions of these later on. On to Route 7. I don't, you know what, there's always a chance that I accidentally do like some weird sign language that means something that I don't think it means, and I don't know sign language. I know very, very, very little, and I want to learn. But That's besides the point. Route 7. A short path connecting Route 8 with the underground path. Wee Pear and Nanab berries are here. We have Meowth, Pidgey, Bellsprout, and Oddish, but we also have some fiery predators in Vulpix and Growlithe. Now, starting with Vulpix, as per Woodland Trust, foxes have a really diverse diet. They are expert hunters, catching rabbits, rodents, birds, frogs, and earthworms, as well as eating carrion. But they aren't carnivorous. They are actually omnivores, as they dine on berries and fruit too. This means every Pokemon's on the chopping block for Vulpix. There basically isn't anything it won't eat in the area, though it does have one threat: a wild dog known as Growlithe. Realistically speaking, in a natural world, as per Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, wild dogs scavenge and will eat animal or vegetable matter. They will hunt for live prey or will eat road-killed animals, dead livestock, and scraps from compost heaps or rubbish tips. Wild dogs mostly take small prey such as rabbits, possums, rats, wallabies, and bandicoots. Growlithe also has a powerful olfactory sense. That's your nose, baby! Now, he'll use that to locate and chase down any intruders. It never forgets a scent, senses the emotions of others, and can bark at creatures that approach it even while it's sleeping, so you can't even sneak up on Growlithe. This makes Growlithe the top dog, pun intended, in the area without a doubt. Though, I'm sure Vulpix will try here and there to, eat it, or, when it gets a really good opportunity when they move in their skull, because they're packs. But otherwise, when caught by, one-on-one, it's probably just going to try and feign injury in order to escape, especially if they're battling. Though, when we look at it all, I don't think Growlithe is actively going to hunt down Poliwag due to the water typing effectiveness, but despite that, I feel like Growlithe could still win the fight. I just don't think it's beneficial, so the thing about nature is, you're going to try and play smart. You're going to go after the easy catch. If you can get 100 rabbits really easily without expending a bunch of energy, you get the 100 rabbits. That's pretty much what it boils down to. Otherwise, Growlithe, I know in the food chain video, I said, yeah, it's friendly, it's happy, it's very, very, kind to humans and likely kind to Pokemon and so on and so forth. But ultimately, outside of that, when we look at the fact that it's an actual wild dog, and we look at natural, life and everything like that, it's a wolf. It's our wolf, basically. It's gonna hunt. It's a wolf with firepower. It's a flamethrower wolf. What do you want? There's no way it's not going to eat other Pokemon. Just the way that it is. Next up, we have Route 8. A short path connecting Route 7 with the underground path. Here we find Leppa, Lump, Pineapple, and Rost berries. I will say now, the underground path is not an underground path where you can encounter Pokemon, so don't worry about that. Now, you will also find here big mushrooms and yellow apricorns. We don't see any new Pokemon, but we do get a big mixing of Pokemon. That being Growlithe, Vulpix, Meowth, Ekans, Pidgey, and Sandshrew. Arguably, all of them would eat berries except for Meowth and Ekans. Growlithe would likely eat anything here. Vulpix would too, realistically speaking, but it might not go after Growlithe unless in a skulk. And Meowth likely just can't compare to Growlithe and Vulpix, but it will go after them if it thinks it can actually win, or it steps into their territory, trying, maybe they get attracted and maybe they're in its coins. And cats are one of those creatures where you don't mess with them. And let's take a slight tangent. And I've mentioned this before. Do you know what a bobcat is? I don't exactly know how to describe it. Just a solid-sized cat. We're not talking like a leopard. We're not talking a tiger or anything like that, right? It's a solid-sized cat, though. It's to me, it makes me think of like the munchkin version of a leopard, like a fat version, like a mangy leopard. I don't know. All right, it's gonna be on screen. Nevertheless, bobcat or bear? Which one is quote-unquote higher on the food chain? Give you a couple seconds here. If you said bear, you are wrong. This is not me, like, this, I'm not exaggerating. You are wrong. And you're like, well, a bear's gonna that bobcat no problem. What are you talking about? And it's like, no. Technically, yes. The bear could absolutely demolish the bobcat, but bears actively stay away from bobcat territories because when a bobcat decides it's gonna kill you, it does not stop until the bobcat is dead. Meaning that unless this bear actually wins, the bobcat won't stop. It'll chase it down. It'll keep going. That bear will not get off rent-free, damage-free. And as such, it's not worth it. The bear stays away because it's like, I don't want to eat you. You're not worth me eating. I can get easier food elsewhere. There's some nice fatty salmon right over there. Or these berries. Or how about just the very occasional, very sweet honey. Whatever it is, the bear is not going to go after the bobcat. It's not worth it. And in fact, it could end up causing the bear to end up with an injury that could get infected or otherwise and put the bear's life in danger. As such, bobcat higher than bear, which, it's weird. It's so weird to think about. So if you wanted food chain based stuff, again, it's going to be a mess. Like if you wanted, the food chains are just not accurate, and that's why I'm so happy to be doing this and having the stronger level of accuracy thrown in here. So, with Meowth here, it's, you know, sure, if these Pokemon end up in his territory, it's gonna throw down the gauntlet. But otherwise, it's probably not gonna go after them, and instead will just happily eat Ekans, Pidgey, and Sandshrew. And again, Ekans, being a snake, will also happily eat Pidgey, even climb up their trees and go after their eggs, of course. And then Pidgey now has Sandshrew as a food source, but Sandshrew might actually try to eat it back because short-tailed shrews eat songbirds. And again, Sandshrew, since it is not dramatically smaller than Ekans, there's a very good chance that it will also eat Ekans in return, or even actively hunt them, as short-tailed shrews will eat small snakes. Route 9. A road that forms a maze crossing a small rocky mountain. Pineapple and Chesto berries are here. And our array of Pokemon includes Spearow, Ekans, Sandshrew, and Rattata. Fairly streamlined and similar to the previous areas, but now with Spearow taking top dog, quote-unquote, in this area as our bird. Though now we have the interaction between Sandshrew and Rattata, which we've covered that short-tailed shrews will eat mice, putting Rattata at the bottom technically, but this isn't, again, a food chain. We're trying to be as accurate as possible, especially as Rattata are aggressive and real-life rats are known to hunt and kill prey. Give them a group to work with, as Rattata often move in swarms, and it's just a numbers game as to who's gonna win and who will win. What's to say there's not, 40 Rattata moving together against one individual, and then they swarm and then move on to the next one. Realistically speaking, it's hard to consider every single possibility, but sure, that's one of them. I will also note, as a small tangent, here's a really fun thing. When you look at a fight, you could think of it mathematically like a nerd. I say nerd all the time, but I play D&D. I like anime. I hate saying that. I actually hate saying that. I enjoy a good story, and I end up watching a decent amount of anime. But, bunch of other stuff, right? So I say nerd and weeb endearingly, so don't worry. But if you want to take a one-on-one fight or more as a nerd and put a numbers game to it, the power of a person in a group against another is exponential. So a one-on-one fight is a one-on-one fight. A one-on-two fight is actually a one-on-4 fight. A one-on-3 fight is a one-on-9 fight. Go so on and so forth. You got 16, 25, 40, wait, was it 49? Is it 49? 36, 49, 64. Do your times tables in school, kids. They do 81, 100. What is it? Then you get into 11s at 121, 144. You keep going from there. I can't do anything higher than that. Anywho, let's move forward after I gave you your elementary school trauma back to you. Route 10. A road that passes along the canal and comes out at the power plant. Cherry, Persim, and Nana berries are here, and we see our 3 familiar faces with Spearow, Ekans, and Sandshrew. Now, I initially expected that the Sandshrew came from the cave, but there's no population of them in there, as we will talk about soon enough. This means that they didn't have a hand in the cave construction and might actually reside in the softy, sandy area nearby rather than the hard rock of the cave. This could actually end up causing additional erosion of the banks, possibly breaking down the soil in the area to make it more favorable for them. Alternatively, they could also just be adding soil to it by breaking down soft rocks in the area and adding sand to it, which reinforces the banks and ensures that erosion is slowed down. There's a lot of possibilities there. It depends on the Sandshrew. In addition, the Ekans population is actually roughly the same as Sandshrew, while Spearow is just barely above them. What's the reasoning for this? The Voltorb from the nearby power plant. While it is separated by water, these Voltorb are still making it over on occasion. They do enjoy any area where they can feed on electricity, but they also have a very volatile temperament and will explode if agitated or bumped by the slightest contact. And when we look at everything, knowing Spearow are aggressive and Ekans are consistently looking for meals, this means they are likely getting electrocuted or blown up by Voltorb. Because they just can't stop messing with them. It's like, oh, that looks like food, or oh, that's a shiny thing. Dunk! Sandshrew, on the other hand, though, may be here as it takes advantage of this situation, eating the Pokémon that Voltorb leaves behind because Voltorb is not going to eat other Pokémon. I also wouldn't be surprised if this causes additional erosion of the stream banks and helps widen the canal incidentally, potentially even ruining some of the Sandshrew's, like, you know, hidey holes because Voltorb is just kabooming. But why don't we follow Voltorb back to the power plant? A power plant that was abandoned years ago, though some of the machines still work. It is infested with electric Pokemon. Here are where our Voltorb come from, but there are a number of other electric Pokemon here that call this place their home. Pikachu being one of them, likely finding the place to simply be a nice little safe place for it to recharge some electric energy or discharge some before heading out to forage for food. But we also have Magnemite. It and its evolved forms are entirely mechanical, but do show that they need to eat something and can display emotions and even reproduce. I don't want to find out if those bolts are anything more than just bolts. Its main form of nutrition would be and is electrical currents and is found in power plants or caves with strong magnetic fields because of this. These Pokemon have been around apparently for over 3,000 years, as they were depicted in carvings discovered in the ruins of Alph and in AZ's retelling of the Kalos War. Magnemite generates an electromagnetic field to defy gravity and even disrupt electrical equipment. That's why its and Magneton and Magnezone can float. Though it is not unnecessarily aggressive, it might approach with little warning or notice, so you might just have a little jump scare from a Magnemite behind your, shoulder there. And in fact, if you approach it, it may even flee, as it does not care for any interactions whatsoever. But if you try to attack it, it's going to retaliate at you with non-damaging moves, paralyze you, and kind of away. Up next, though, we have its evolution, Magneton. The magnetic forces that hold the 3 Magnemite together are powerful enough to dry up all moisture and raise the temperature by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius within a radius of 3,300 feet, 1 kilometer. And you were afraid of things like Slugma and Magcargo. Little did you know Magnemite's a threat. It can also be disruptive to electronic devices and induce earaches. I actually have tinnitus, so as much as I love the Magnemite line, that might be horrible for me. It does use powerful radio waves to help it study the surrounding area, kind of like echolocation. Though it is roughly 3 times as powerful as Magnemite, it is not necessarily 3 times smarter, and it still feeds on electrical currents and lives in the same areas. Though when sunspots flare up, Magneton tends to appear more often, presumably due to the changes in the sun's magnetic field. It also gathers in high areas when it storms so that it can get struck by lightning. And it can turn that electricity into platforms and barriers and even produce electromagnetic pulses to destroy electronics. But finally, we have the rarest encounter here being Electabuzz as we move away from Magneton. In the dark, it glows light blue from the electrical charges running across its body. This is because it is constantly leaking more electricity than it consumes. If you stand near it, your hair will just stand on end, and they will often group together around tall trees so when they get struck, they can absorb the lightning's energy. So they're often used as an alternative to lightning rods and communicate with each other through these electrical currents. Blackouts happen when they gather to consume electricity from power plants on occasion, but more often than not, that's actually the power plant just messing up and not doing what they should, and they just blame it on the Electabuzz Pokemon, which is very unfair. Funny enough, it also hates the color red and will go into a rampage if it sees it. I wonder if that's related to Magmar, but it's found in grasslands, so I don't know if they come in contact all that often. The power plant itself, really, though, is just a place for all these Pokemon to try and absorb electrical energy. Though, since Electabuzz hate red, they might try to fight Magnemite and Magneton because they have a little bit of red on them, and Voltorb, which I don't imagine ends well for it, as the Magnemite line can, even though not use electricity to paralyze Electabuzz, will likely use sound to overload the Electabuzz, make its ears ring, whatever it is to distract it, and then run away. Meanwhile, Voltorb will just simply go, alright, screw you, screw me, screw all these guys, and boom. This might also explain why they are present in such low numbers in terms of Electabuzz itself. Just isn't the greatest environment for it. All while Pikachu is simply there to either recharge and discharge energy, which is what might also be supplying Pokemon here with the energy that they're getting because they keep coming back here, but that doesn't provide nearly enough energy for all of these Pokemon. So that can't be the source. Instead, it's our legendary Zapdos. This place is humming with electricity because Zapdos resides within it, brimming with electrical energy that it can simply release by just flapping its wings, which are said to crackle with that energy. There's enough electronics and enough power banks in this area that when Zapdos just releases that energy, it supplies these things with power, and because the power plant is run down, or because these electric Pokemon know how to plug in almost literally and take the electrical energy, they're able to take in the energy that Zapdos releases through the medium of the technology within the power plant. Though Zapdos makes this its home currently, it does not permanently reside here. It does enjoy living amongst the thunderclouds and just uses this place as it deems fit to just kind of rest, maybe, and inadvertently ends up creating an ecosystem for electric Pokemon, or maybe it does see kinship with these electric Pokemon and wants to supply something back to them, taking care of its own kind, and does this on purpose. So it's a nice little picture to have of the electrical power plant that we have here. Messed with my hair too much, and now I've got like really mad scientist stuff going on here. It's fun. Also, I realize you guys probably haven't seen the full shirt. Oh no, you did. I didn't have the shirt on, or I had the shirt. Oh my gosh, I didn't have the coat on. proper earlier. I wanted to wear the cat one again. And also for anybody who might be asking, because every once in a while there's comments being like, oh, where'd you get that shirt? Blah, blah, blah. And that's not me making fun of you. That's just, I don't know what you sound like. But, Hot Topic, I was a Hot Topic nerd when I was younger. And also, I ended up liking a couple of things that ended up becoming popular and Hot Topic had it. So I was like, oh, sure, it became mainstream now. I can go to Hot Topic. This is great. I'm not gonna be upset that it's mainstream and now all these people like my stuff. No, I get to go enjoy it. There's more merch for it now. Yay! It's great. So I don't know. Look at your Hot Topic. I guess I'm not sponsored. I just, whatever. I don't care. They're never. Hot Topic's never gonna freaking sponsor me. That's not something that Hot Topic would look into. But let's talk about the rock tunnel, a naturally formed underground tunnel. Because it has not been developed, it is inky dark inside, and a light is needed to get through. Here we find tiny and big mushrooms again, but our ecosystem has flipped a bit on its head, and we have quite a few different Pokemon to talk about. Starting with floor 1, we have Geodude being the most common, followed by Zubat. We can assume they live normally here as they did in the other cave and any cave that we might talk about in the future, though oddly enough, we find some Mankey here. I can't find a nearby source, so they could just simply be descending from above the cave itself, nearby mountains, so on and so forth, attracted by the berries that might exist outside, and just wandering into the cave. And they ultimately could just be rampaging into here accidentally, especially as they only have, a 15% encounter rate. Nevertheless, they are a good source of food for the Zubat, as the Zubat can then swoop down and take a little bite here and there while the Mankey is rampaging. Maybe it's not paying attention, and it gets a nice quick meal, especially since Zubat is rather small. Just gets what it needs. Machop, though, is also in here, going through daily training routines involving lifting boulders and gravelers repeatedly as if they were barbells. Because I've been talking about Pokemon for so long, when I said boulders out loud, I thought I was saying a Pokemon's name. It is drilled into my brain where I have accidentally so many times called Pokemon animals and animals Pokemon. The worlds are blending and I'm going crazy. Back to this though, Machop also lives in the mountains, eating a diet of highly nutritious food to efficiently build those muscles. Once again, as I stated for Mankey, this area does have the previous route where there was a multitude of berries that could provide plenty of nutrition, and in here, it's a nice little training area. Now, while Zubat do inhabit the cave, Geodude may move a few rocks, smoothing out the ground by rolling it around. Maybe a Mankey destroys a rock or two in its rampage, attacking Geodude, occasionally disturbing a Zubat, and maybe even the Zubats go after the Machop, which it happily takes on the challenge, or fights mano-a-mano with those Mankey whenever it gets a little too antsy and ornery and decides that it wants to try and fight, Machop. But there's one more Pokemon on this floor that contributes primarily to the structure of the caves, and that would be Onix. Being known to tunnel under the ground at over 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour, this creates tremors and echoes along the way. This likely disturbs all Pokemon in the area, especially Zubat. So, it absorbs any hard objects, and we can assume inorganic material in general, into its body. This allows it to become sturdier, especially as it consumes boulders for food. The tunnels it leaves behind are also used as homes by Diglett, and of course, in this case, we can see that it's being used by a plethora of Pokemon, creating an ecosystem. If in pain, Onix will constantly attack humans and other Pokemon. Though it is said that if an Onix has parts ripped away from it, that over time it can actually regenerate those parts, being even separated and reforming itself from its separated pieces. It also sleeps while in the middle of digging sometimes, which I couldn't tell if that meant that it's digging and then stops and falls asleep, or while it is still digging, it is like sleepwalking, but sleep digging, which is really, really scary and to be really... I mean, they don't go deep enough that they'll run into lava based on the information, but it would be kind of funny if they just kept digging while they were asleep and just slammed into a big chunk of lava. Onix does serve as both a creature that none of the other Pokemon will bother, while also shaping the environment through its natural existence. It's like a beaver, in my opinion. You know, you get beavers. They decide that for some reason they don't want the ground foliage. No, they want the leaves. They want the leaves on the trees. So what do? They walk over a tree, bite onto it, the tree drops, and they're like, fantastic. I get to eat this little bit of leaf that was up there. And they love it. They're happy and they're great. And then they're like, well, what do we do with this, Chuck? And it's like, I don't know, Bill. How about we make a dam? Let's completely destroy this ecosystem over here by blocking the water. Ooh, fish. Wait, do beavers eat fish? Looking it up. According to the state of Maine government website, Fish and Wildlife, beaver, their diet includes leaves, inner bark, and twigs of deciduous trees and shrubs that make up their primary food. Popple, aspen trees, are the favorite, followed by birch, cottonwood, willow, oak, and maple. Beavers will also eat herbaceous plants, grasses, oh, I guess I was partially wrong, and some aquatic plants. Okay, so they don't eat fish? Interesting. They just eat a lot of soft vegetation. Huh. Western Beavers Cooperative. I'm not going down that. I'm not going down that. We'll talk about that when I'm in Generation 4 and I have to talk about our Lord and Savior Bidoof. And the only thing that changes that is in Basements 1F, the next floor down, is that Machop become less rare, but Onyx become more common, which makes sense. As you go deeper, you would expect to see more of these deep burrowing rock snakes. But there actually is another difference, as when we look at the rocks, because when you use Rock Smash on the rocks here, we not only encounter Geodude, but also Graveler, because this is likely that you aren't smashing a rock in those scenarios, but instead mistaking them for rocks. So, can you imagine just sleeping and some idiot just boom, like just right in the back of your head, and it's just that stone turn as they move over, and you look at them and just go boom right back. Just a monster of a situation. This also does, though, explain why the Machop are in greater number here, because they're lifting the Graveler as weights. They know that Graveler are here somewhere, and they have a nice free weight to use. Looking at Graveler, though, they love rolling around, rolling down hills and mountains at high speeds, crushing rocks along the way. Though, it would just apparently flat out go boom if it rolled into a river. Probably because what happens is, when you look at something that's super dry, I guess it may not, actually explode. But if something is excessively dry and you introduce water, what's happening is it's super, super compact is all that's holding it together. So, all that happens at that point is if you introduce water, what, it's able to do, or what it has been doing, which is just barely holding itself together just by pure compaction, you're introducing water, which changes the composition and causes it to fall apart. And I'm not going to get into it here because it's way more complicated than I'm willing to get into right now, and I had to go through it in my geology class, but ultimately, dirts, depending on its composition, you have clay, sand, silt, and when you add water, you can add a certain amount of water to your soil, and depending on its composition, water can help it or hurt it depending on just how much water there is. Clay, with a bunch of water, clay is super absorbent. It is thick, it is strong, it is dense. Well, I guess it's not. Either way, it absorbs a lot of water, right? So water kind of helps it. It creates, it kind of reduces it. I think it reduces the friction. See, now I'm getting into the parts where it's kind of, gray area. But it reduces the friction and helps actually bind the particles together a little bit better, Whereas, like, if you add a bunch of sand, yeah, sure, you can add a little bit, spray it, whatever, you're making really great sandcastles. But if you just dump water on it, it's just gonna fall apart. Hopefully that made sense to you. Go look at a sandcastle. Go look at a clay castle. What's clay castle? Wait, those are just houses. Back to Graveler. Graveler restores any broken pieces by eating rocks. Its favorite being those that are moss covered, as we mentioned before, which apparently when it eats moss rocks, it makes very, very loud noises while eating them. So I just imagine like a little mini earthquake sounding thing, as it's just very happily eating them. But again, this also explains why I state that it is likely that Geodude assumedly eats rocks and moss rocks as well. So again, this would explain why Geodude may eat rocks or moss rocks as well, assumedly, and explains our theory as to why Geodude goes to the bottom of the mountain for food. Graveler will live in horizontal holes they gouge out from sheer cliff faces. So they're just miners that are just gunk, gunk, gunk. Alright, I'm living here now. This hole was made for me. Now, since it eats so many rocks, it could be contributing to the shape of these caves, especially as it rolls around a bunch. Honestly, this might be one of my favorite little ecosystems so far, as it feels very complete and interconnected. It's not just a prey and predator idea, but more of a functioning ecosystem that can continually evolve and expand rather than just be a normal cycle of rat, bird, bug, rotate, rat, bird, bug, you know? So imagine what could happen in this cave and what Pokemon could take refuge here eventually with the further expansion of it. And I'm sure we will see that in future generations when we look at things like Sableye or, oh gosh, whatever other Pokemon might end up being in caves. I'm thinking of the one that's based on a Yukiona. I know that's so descriptive. It's a yellow one with the black on its head, and it's got a mega form, and it looks like a girl, and then when it turns around, it eats you with its hair thing. Whatever, we're moving on. Next up, we actually have Pokémon Tower. This one was a fairly strange one for me to include because it is a man-made structure, but I actually couldn't ignore it, and it brings me to a couple of interesting theories that I'd like to throw out there, because many Pokemon are types, and what I mean by this is that you're not a bug, you are a bug type. You're not normal, you're a normal type. You're not a ghost, you're a ghost type. It's alluded that they aren't actually what their type is. They're just related to it. And I mean, realistically speaking, not every fire type is pure fire. Some of them just control fire or have a fire organ, whatever it is. And then when we add the knowledge that we know that the Pokédex has lied to us before, or more scientifically speaking, it just doesn't have the complete information yet, and so science has to adjust what we know to be more truthful as time goes on. This might result in new information down the line, such as maybe Yamask, or Yamask, I'll say it right for you, but Yamask sounds better on my mouth, tongue, lips thing. I talk like an alien sometimes, my gosh. But maybe Yamask doesn't actually carry the mask of its former self when it was alive as a human. And maybe many ghost types aren't actually ghosts. Now that's my teaser to you, as when October rolls around, I am going to cover every ghost type Pokemon and explain some of the theories around them. So look forward to that. And thank you for making it this far. I appreciate you. If you're sleeping to this, as always, I guess have a good dream. I don't know what to exactly say there. I'll always be awkward about that. But nevertheless, thank you guys so much. If you would like, again, please support through memberships. Otherwise, I can never truly ask for more than your viewership, as that means the world that you guys decide it's a great idea to talk to or listen to me babble on for so long, even though it is fairly refined research. So, let's talk again about the ghosts in Pokémon Tower. A tower that houses the graves of countless Pokemon. Many people visit it daily to pay their respects to the fallen. Here we have Ghastly, Haunter, and Cubone. Ghastly has a body made of toxic gas that also produces a faint, sweet smell. It's going to come back later. It can enshroud an enemy of any size, but otherwise has a friendly personality, even being rumored to pass the memories of departed humans to us in our world. Love to, thank you. Thank you for passing on my great-great-grandmother's, or actually no, my 4th great-grandfather's words to me, asking me why am I not hunting for my food right now, that none of this makes sense, and why have I not had 30 children. Thanks. Thanks, great-great-great-great-grandpa. Appreciate it. Keep asking those questions. God, it's really stupid. Now, it can change its form, create illusions, form tangible hands, and pass through solid objects, though they will dwindle away if exposed to strong winds, so they stay huddled together. Rather strange that a ghost would be affected by wind, isn't it? So they stick to caves and dilapidated buildings. While not dilapidated, the tower is a great place for what it loves to do and for keeping it safe. I doubt it's actively, constantly consuming anything here, but I have a theory. Ghastly are not born from a past Pokemon. Otherwise, they would carry the memories of that Pokemon with them, as we've kind of seen with other Ghost-type Pokemon for the most part. I mean, we've seen it with, like, Banette, who was a doll that, got brought back from cursed life energy or whatever. Or, I believe, Phantom has some memory of its past. So, and the Yamask as well, because it cries, if I remember correctly. Like, I think the mask can be seen crying. So, you kind of remember things to some degree, But that's not necessarily the case for all Ghost-type Pokemon. You know what I mean? This isn't always the case, and you get Ghost Pokemon that are born from eggs. You can have a Yamask brought back from an egg. So, where do Ghastly really come from? And I say, they are born from buried bodies. And this is the one time my forensic science degree comes into use, as dead bodies, as they decompose, will give off a mixing smell of rotting meat with some sort of sickly sweet smell that some people compare to rotting fruit. That should sound really familiar to Ghastly's description. So, the tower being a graveyard, in turn, created Ghastly through decomposition. And now Ghastly exists in this world as this is a breeding ground for them, a place for them to be born from. Next, we move on, though, to Haunter, the evolution of Ghastly that is also apparently afraid of light. If human or Pokemon comes near, they will beckon it closer, lick them, and cause the victim to convulse until death. Being able to even just pull your spirit from your body. While it has what is described as a predatory nature, it is known to entertain and prank people and is intensely loyal to a deceased trainer. So once again, we have the perfect area for Haunter as well to just safely exist. It's nice and dark here. Now, we could make the assumption that Ghastly and Haunter would hunt humans that come into the tower, but I actually doubt that, as there has been no sign of people fearing the tower. Sure, there in the game are the possessions that happen here and there, but those are also from people doing seances. People who are actively being like, I want to speak to the dead, and then they get possessed because they're, whatever happens, you know what I mean? And they're getting possessed, they're being controlled, and Haunter and Ghastly are like, it's just a prank, bro. Don't worry. I stole your credit card information because it's just a prank, bro. Don't do that. Do not do that, okay? So, instead, it seems that these Pokemon might just exist in this space and feed off of the miasma of death that just exists here. Though, there is, of course, just the chance that they hunt Cubone. Cubone, created with the inspiration of wondering how sad it would be for a Pokemon to die. You know what? Put the short here. I'm putting the short here. I love it's one of my favorite shorts that I've made it so long ago. I'm rating your favorite Pokemon because they say it's truly skilled trainers should win with their favorites. Cubone was made to be sad. It was straight up said that it was created out of the thought of how sad it would be for a Pokemon to die. Where in the skull of its deceased mother, it cries and moaning, crying even harder as it sees its mother in the full moon. And those cries are even more haunting due to the way they echo inside the skull. Let's take a listen and see what that could sound like. But each cry and tear only makes Cubone stronger, and once it comes to terms with its trauma, it evolves into Marowak. I just want to give Cubone a big ol' hug and wipe away those tears, so of course it gets my approval. Subscribe to support the channel and convince me to rate your favorite Pokemon next. And back from the short, these Pokemon, the Cubone, live in rocky areas, mountains, or caves, for example, and is stated to also have once inhabited the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town where deceased Pokemon were buried and mourned. And it's not said, we know that they... Oh, wait, what? They once inhabited. This is a live realization of what I direct quote, and I thought that it was like, oh yeah, they once inhabited. They're literally living there. They have a population. It's like a 5% population, but no. Are you telling me that there is the chance that Cubone just flat out lived in this tower and maybe we drove them out? Why? That doesn't make sense. Oh, bleh. Whatever. Whatever. That's speculation for future me to deal with. That's a mess. That's a weird little mess. Strictly speaking, though, Cubone is here to mourn, and I'm sure it finds plenty of company here with others that mourn, allowing it to come to terms with the help of another in that mourning. Also, there are big mushrooms here, so maybe it just occasionally eats those. It's kind of hard to say. The whole thing is kind of bittersweet, if I have to be honest. I would dare say that the tower is a neutral place where the Ghastly and Haunter don't strike, but simply exist alongside Cubone for all the reasons stated. Though, no neutral system would be perfect, so we could add in on the occasion, our resident ghosts will take the life of a human, a Cubone, or a stray Pokemon that somehow wanders their way in. Otherwise, as you climb the tower, there are less Ghastly and noticeably more Haunter. Maybe less people go up to the top and there are no windows, so it's further from the entrance, and so there's less and less of a chance of light. So Haunter, being afraid of light, can happily live in the darkness where they like to play pranks and tap on your shoulder. Diglett's Cave! Diglett! Diglett! Diglett Dig! Literally nothing but Diglett and Dugtrio! Although, I will make a small exception and at least mention the fact that in the Pokemon Let's Go games, there is a small Zubat chance, which it makes sense. It makes sense that a couple of bats would probably just their way into the cave and, you know, make their lives in there. No Golbat, though. Diglett itself, though, as we discussed, lives in tunnels made by Onyx, though they also make their own burrows near forests and even inside trees. That was new information to me. I assumed, like, it's not, you know, they're just jumping from the ground and just drilling Gurren Lagann style into the middle of a freaking tree, but instead are, like, going under and up into the tree, potentially. They leave behind perfectly tilled soil for others, even enriching the land by leaving droppings behind. Though it does come with a price, as it is a mole still, and feeds on tree roots and vegetables, making some people consider it a pest. It spends so much time underground and has a thin skin, so if it's ever exposed to sunlight, its blood will heat up and it'll grow weak. Speak about the #1 Pokemon that needs to go touch grass and be out in the sun more, so that way it actually gets stronger. But that'll take generations for them to be able to do that. I did have to do some mole research, of course, and found out from the University of Aberdeen. In the case of the Iberian mole, we found that even though their eyes are permanently shut, they can see and run away from bright light, which we assume means they use their eyes to detect holes in the roof of their tunnel networks. So moles aren't theoretically blind, and they are sensitive to sunlight. As a side, I also just kind of typed moles at first and read that they get darker after sun exposure, pregnancy, and during puberty, and I didn't immediately realize when I had initially searched it that I was reading about moles, like skin moles, from the Cleveland Clinic, and I thought it was talking about actual moles for a second there. So I was also imagining a scenario where a mole didn't know that it was pregnant until their skin color changed, which would be a really funny little animated video drama thing. But how about we move on from moles and move on to moles. So Doug Trio. 3 Diglett that are sharing a single body. I really didn't... I thought they could separate. That's what I always figured. The 3 heads think the same thoughts and act cooperatively, but they may occasionally fight over who gets to eat first, which is also really weird because you'd assume that it's the same stomach if they're sharing a body, but maybe it's some weird amalgamation of like a conjoined twin, kind of like they conjoined themselves to each other, and now you have your organs splitting between 3. Oh god, that's body horror right there. I am so sorry to anybody who listened to that. I like horror. I never talk about it. So, I mean, I'm gonna have fun in October. Come join the streams. I'm probably gonna play the Alien games, Alien Isolation. It's doing great. Usually I don't get scared very easily, but when I get scared, I sing. It's great. But Diglett can't travel at 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers an hour, at a depth of the same measurements. They could go that deep, 60 miles below or 100 kilometers below. They're important for agriculture, live in the same areas, and sometimes trigger tremors and earthquakes, which, yeah, if you're a freaking living fracking system, basically, yes, I know fracking is you're injecting oils and waters and all this stuff into the ground, depending on what you're actually doing, so don't at me. But, you know, when you're just going willy-nilly throughout the ground, of course you're gonna cause earthquakes and tremors. You're messing with the ground, especially when if you're trying to go deep enough. So, overall, the Diglett species gets to basically live rent-free here in its perfect little habitat without having to worry about anything or anyone else other than, you know, maybe a sand shrew in other areas might try to dig in and grab it. Maybe an Ekans, when it gets cold, decides to use one of their tunnels as a place for it to sleep. Maybe all these different things that happen, which is very possible and can paint us a better picture of the world ecosystem. Oh gosh, that's a whole other thing. That's nigh on impossible. That's nigh on impossible. That would cause so many problems to try and figure out, that there would be so many inconsistencies. I don't even want to think about it. We're going to move on to the next route. Route 11. A grassy path with a gentle, refreshing breeze. We get some green apricorns and raspberries, and everything seems normal again. We have Spearow, Ekans, and Sandshrew filling in their normal niches as we've already talked about. Maybe the Spearow are just in the tree lines waiting for their chance with Ekans and Sandshrew in quarrels. And then there's Drowsy. They live in grasslands and savannas. They're based on the tapir for its animal origins, but don't let that fool you because this thing just likes to eat dreams. It's explicitly stated. It loves fun dreams and gets ill from bad dreams, preferring to eat the dreams of children instead of adults, which, yeah, thank you. That's a great metaphor for depression, Drowsy. I appreciate it. I'm sorry that my dreams aren't as whimsical as they used to be, and I have to think about bills. Oh no, bills, the scariest thing known to mankind. Nope, we're gonna move on. That's such a dumb thing to say. We're moving on. Now, it is noted that Drowsy and Musharna are believed to have some sort of ancient ancestor that they have in common that we don't know about yet. Maybe we'll find out in a Legends game one day. While it also primarily states people that it eats its dreams from, I am confident it would eat the dreams of any other Pokemon as well, and it eats this through their nose. Here's the thing. It doesn't even harm the individual in the process, so it's really hard to think about what its impact on the ecosystem is in terms of what it does. So no matter how hard I thought, it just gave me a headache because I want to enact realism, but I can't. Not with Drowsy. If I try to say, oh, because it's based on the tapir does this, that, the other thing, 100 other, things that it eats or whatever-wise, fantastic. But this is one of the situations where it does explicitly state that it just eats dreams. It doesn't eat anything else. And why would it eat anything else? All you have to do is wait for something to be asleep, and you walk over and you take its dreams through its nose. I'm tempted to leave that sneeze in. You have your natural resource, quote unquote natural resource dreams. How do you... Oh, no, that gets into a whole other thing. Dreams as a natural resource, as a tangible, measurable thing. Why? Why? I don't know what to do. Maybe on the rare occasion, if it has to, it's gonna eat berries. It has a mouth. Otherwise, like, if we go back to my ancient Pokemon video, which if you haven't watched that, please go watch it. I nerd out a lot about the ancient history of our world and explaining Pokemon as a part of that. But, like, the only reason Jaws were developed is so that way we can eat, crush, and chew a wider variety of food, or at least animals in general could do that. So, why does it have a jaw if it's not going to use it? I don't know. It does communicate with others of its kind. This becomes so weird. I also don't know how attractive dreams are in terms of nutrition. How do you weigh the health of a dream? Clearly, the happy, fun ones are the ones that it eats, and it is healthy from it because it'll get sick from bad dreams or unhappy dreams, and it remembers every dream that it eats, so that way it can share it with people. So maybe it's just large right now because it's collecting the dreams within its body, but then you have weight added to dreams. That doesn't make sense! It doesn't make sense! This is what happens to me when I'm doing my research, because I'm like spitballing right now in the video, because I'm like, you know what, I know I wrote this stuff down, but now it's snowballing, and I want to move on. I want to move on. Maybe it's attacked by Ekans and Spearow. Maybe it feasts on them in their dreams. The upside is that now we're connected to the bay, so we don't just, we move on. I'm done talking about the land creatures. We're moving on. We don't just get Magikarp in the water, we get Krabby. Kooky. They live near the edge of the water in both fresh and salt water. Most commonly found on beaches where it burrows into the sand, and it may even eat sand for nutrients if food is scarce. They're aggressive in defending their home, and even creates a foam to shroud its body in to confuse and intimidate enemies. They keep fairly to themselves unless provoked, and we can assume easily that Spearow are going to try and eat them. If Ekans can get to the softer underbelly that they have, then they'll probably try to eat Krabby as well, although they have to get past those pincers of theirs. I tried searching around some more and found that, generally speaking, crabs are opportunistic eaters, meaning whatever they can get their claws on, they will eat. Of course, though, they will prefer diets of worms, shrimp, snails, and other crustaceans, and small animals, while other types of crabs might just primarily eat plants. It's a case-by-case basis, and usually that's the case for multiple animals in general anyway. I'm just going to assume Krabby is super opportunistic and might just fight and eat everything that bothers it, then just goes back to living in its little sandhole. Following that up, we do have Horsey. They feed on insects and moss gathered from rocks, defending itself by spraying water or dense black ink. It has great accuracy and can shoot down insects flying above the water, and it nests in coral reefs and islands throughout the oceans with gentle currents. They lay eggs every year, and the male raises the young. They even swim with dance-like motions, creating whirlpools by doing so, and compete with each other as to who can make the biggest whirlpool. It is really odd, now that I think about it, that I know Horsey will lay eggs, and then I know Seadra will also lay eggs. It's very, very interesting. Eggs in Pokemon, they're really weird, and I think Rowan, was it Rowan? No, it was Birch. No, it wasn't Birch. I just did the professor video and it's all gone from my head. Either way, Pokemon, it's Rowan. Pokemon in general, actually it's the second generation. Pokemon in general, this is what happens to my brain. and their eggs are incredibly strange, and that's a whole other ball game, a whole other video to talk about, and the secrets of Pokemon eggs. You know what? That's a video. That's gonna be a fun short video, like an hour long. I say short because it's still gonna be an hour long. Back to Horsey. So the weird thing is, despite it eating insect Pokemon, we don't really have any regular insect Pokemon. Sure, one or two might fly by and just get sniped by this pea shooter here, but it will likely primarily just feed on moss and try to stay away from any Krabby that get a little too venturous. So I have a feeling that Spearow also won't try to grab it all the time, since it can also potentially get sniped down, but I'm confident there's a case or two where a Horsey will rise up out of the water, and before you know it, before it knows it, the Spearow already grabbed it in its talons, and that Horsey is gone. Route 12, a bridge known for its fishing. It's also called Silence Bridge. Of course, you get your one Snorlax encounter, but it isn't really much a part of this small ecosystem. Same goes for the Snorlax that you can find on Route 16. I'll still talk about Snorlax here, but keep in mind that we can kind of just apply this information that I will tell you to any given area that Snorlax decides to lay down in at all. Snorlax are often found in mountains and forests, only waking up to eat. It requires 900 pounds of food per day before going back to sleep, which, that's terrifying. That would ruin a farmer's life. That would ruin an entire village's life, for that matter. It's known to actually do exactly that. It is considered a walking disaster that comes in, raids the food storages, eats everything, and if winter is right around the corner, goodbye. That's awful. And it doesn't matter what food there is, it eats it all because its stomach is strong enough that it can withstand thorny plants or even Muck's poison. You know, a creature that is so full of bacteria that when it passes by an area, if I remember correctly, 3 years of desolate land after this Muck is gone, and Snorlax can just, the whole thing? I don't want to know. I kind of want to study the stomach of Snorlax, honestly. But realistically speaking, its stomach is probably super duper developed, because it's going to sleep and all that energy is being used to process food. So its body is able to break it down. Think back to Thanksgiving dinner. The reason why you fall asleep, or, you know, is it because of like, oh, you ate all this turkey and it has your body converts whatever it is in there to melatonin and you go, no, it's because you ate like some 7, 8, 9,000 calories of food, and so your body's like, oh my gosh, we are feasting. We need to process all of this because this isn't normal. So your body starts to quote unquote shut down, not actually shut down, don't freak out, and focus all of its energy towards processing that food. I remember when I did the 1 chip challenge, no, I did not do it on the channel. I did it because I was with my family and everything, and, you know, my sister had it, and she kept taunting me, and she had it for over a year or so. I just looked her dead in the eye, ripped it open, my family went, wait, then pulled up their phone, started recording, and I went, the whole thing. Ate the whole thing in 1 bite. And over the course of 30 minutes, I went from this loud, talking, constantly individual that I am to a silent person that is lactose intolerant, drank over half a gallon of milk, trying not to die. My body got cold and everything, and when I did the research, it's all because my body was basically using all of its energy that it would normally use to keep me warm and do all these other things to instead process the capsaicin that is now in my body in extreme amounts, so that way I don't die. My body was protecting me. That's probably why, and like, I got cold and tired and ended up falling asleep. So that's what's happening to Snorlax, potentially. Snorlax is just, because he's eating so much food and it doesn't matter what he eats, he is so used to, or she is so used to just eating all of this food and then falling asleep, so that way their body can process it properly without dying because it doesn't care what it eats. That was a really big tangent, and when I release the script for this, you're gonna see that that was not on my script whatsoever. It's just what processed through my head, and sometimes that just happens. Although, despite all of this, it is docile enough that it will let children play on it despite its incredible power. I do wonder if there's ever an event where a Snorlax just rolls over and tumbles down a hill and crushes a house or a child. I don't know, man. It's possible. You know, I'm sure there's even a moment in the anime where that happens and they're like, all right, get off the, you know, all right, push the Snorlax off. You got any broken bones? All right, you're good. I mean, Snorlax is really big, but they're also like super soft to my knowledge. So, you know. This, ultimately, though, Snorlax, is just another example of a Pokemon that, once again, doesn't really take part of the ecosystem, other than making it so that wherever it goes, everyone else starves, since it ate all the food. Which, it can affect the ecosystem, but I, again, dare say it's not part of an individual ecosystem, because this would overall cause populations of Pokemon to decrease for a time, because it ate all the natural resources in the area, which we talked about previously, or at least natural resources in terms of food. It doesn't even talk about what water it drinks. I don't want to find out. It probably gets most of its hydration from eating. I mean, a lot of animals do. They don't really, you know, you get like a lot of predators that, because they eat raw meat, there's a lot of blood, and that's where, you know, they get a lot of their hydration from. So maybe it does the same thing. We do also get Pidgey, Oddish, Bellsprout again in this area, stepping away from Snorlax, but we do get the addition of Gloom. It trickles sticky nectar from its mouth with the consistency of drool. It can be used for plant fertilizer, and the nectar and flower on its head produce a strong enough odor to induce fainting in humans from over a mile away. But this scent can also attract prey, and some humans do find it appealing, even using it in some perfume. The odor worsens if Gloom feels that it's in danger. So, despite it having basis in the Rafflesia flower, and the same can be said for its evolution, which I'm just going to tell you now, its evolution, Vileplume does not have any natural spawns in anywhere in Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green. They both being related to Rafflesia flowers, Rafflesias do not, I'm going to clarify this now because I can feel myself muddling my words. Rafflesia flowers do not eat bugs, insects, they're not carnivorous, whatever it is, despite their large size and attracting creatures of many types. But this Pokemon does. So this is where, again, we have another clashing of information, despite what our real world reference is. And Vileplume, we're basing this off of Vileplume, we could say it eats bugs primarily, but I would not be surprised if it eats anything else. And we'll talk about what bugs are in the area, though, in a moment. For now, let's jump into Weepinbell. It camouflages itself as a plant in the forest while waiting for its next victim. It immobilizes prey with its poison powder, then melts it with its internal acids. And its own fluid neutralizes these acids so it doesn't get harmed from itself, which, to be fair... Thank you, Odie. Don't know if you heard that. She got up and, you know, her collar rang. My dogs are always right behind me when I do this. One of them was literally snoring 3 seconds ago. You shouldn't be able to hear it because of how the mic is, but, you know, maybe you'll hear little snores. I don't know. Either way, back to our stomachs. Our stomachs kind of do the same thing, though. If you notice that you salivate a lot right before you vomit, it's because your body's trying to protect your teeth. What it does is your saliva is then, like, has a bunch of enzymes and everything in it that helps protect them, coating them, so that way when your stomach just and all the acid comes out, your teeth are then not completely eroded. I am so sorry to anybody who saw that the collar was popped this whole time, and I did nothing to fix that. That's probably a little bit of my insanity showing. But nevertheless, that's the way that your body protects your teeth, because otherwise your stomach acid is incredibly corrosive, and there's nothing, like, it's terrible just how powerful that acid is. Same thing kind of goes for, like, the inside of your stomach. Your stomach lining is, like, you have, like, there's stuff in there, and I didn't do the research. I just kind of generally know this, so I'm not going to talk about the specifics of it all. But all of that, I'm, like, up here for some reason, even though it's down here, is coated so that way the acids in your stomach don't just rip you apart, because holy crap, that's why you should be afraid of ulcers. Try to keep your stress at a minimum. Eat the appropriate amount of spicy foods that your body can handle. Otherwise, there's always a chance ulcers happen, and that is very damaging to the inside of your body. Your stomach's jungle juice is incredibly powerful, and so is Weepinbell's. but if the prey is too large for Weepinbell to appropriately swallow completely, it will actually use its leaves and cut that prey apart. Weepinbell does hang from branches, living in temperate forests and jungles, and sometimes falls to the ground, and despite hitting the ground, will stay asleep. And let's jump into, after that, the last of our land entries for this area as we talk about Venonat. Poor thing. It's the only cupcake in a room full of sugar-crazed children, as it is found in temperate forests and sleeps in the holes of trees until nightfall, and feeds on small insects that it sees, but only appear at night and are attracted to lights. Unfortunately, Venonat is also attracted to lights. Its eyes, which look like radars, do apparently act as radars and shoot powerful beams of light as well, which is kind of terrifying considering that this is, you just have the chance of getting, pew, laser beamed by this 3-foot fluffy bug. And yes, fluffy, that is fur on its body. I kind of want to hug one, but I feel like if I hug it and I press, you're just going to get like a of like dust all over the place somehow. Let's jump into the water, and again, later on, we're gonna paint our picture. The water hasn't really changed. There's still Magikarp, Krabby, and Horsey, but now we finally have the Super Rod. We can now start considering the full potential of the water population. Now, Psyduck and Slowpoke have a 1% chance of appearing, pretty small and negligible in terms of an ecosystem, but they can still have an effect. Slowpoke, we know it's pretty unfortunately stupid and very slow to respond to external stimuli, taking even 5 seconds after impact to process pain, or even a full day before it realizes its tail has been bitten. It is commonly found at the water's edge where it dips its tail into the water to try and catch a fish for its next meal. Problem is, it forgets what it's doing pretty often and just spends the entire day loafing about, so it likely has to move at some point for food, which there isn't really any here for it, explaining why it has such a low population here, yet somehow it did get here, and we'll talk about that later. It's also just likely eating berries in the area as supplement. When we look at Psyduck, it's constantly stunned by its headache. It can't think clearly and usually stands immobile trying to calm it. Though if it is too severe, it will release the tension in the form of psychic powers. They live in the freshwater lakes and small ponds, or even in rivers within tropical areas. Ducks, in real life, will eat a wide range of food: worms, slugs, roots, seeds, frogs, insects, snails, fish, plants, crustaceans, and more. Thank you, city of Bothell. Whatever. So our dear Psyduck is lazing about, swimming along, and we just accidentally caught them as well. There's also, now that I think about it, the idea that maybe if you look at sensory deprivation tanks when you're in the dark and in the water, that could calm a headache, or when you're in water in general, especially colder water, it can help release tension. So that could be a part of why they're in the water as much as they are, not just because they are ducks. We have one more Pokemon, and then we're going to try and put this little mini ecosystem together with the land and water, since there's a lot of entries here, and I promised you many times that there would be a much more detailed section later on, and this is kind of where we are. We're getting into the points where there are so many Pokemon, we can really put their ecosystem together, and it's beautiful. This last entry for this route is Gyarados. Incredibly violent in nature, its fangs crush stones and its scales are harder than steel. If it rampages, it lasts for a month at a time and will destroy everything it comes across. It lives in both fresh and salty waters and can leap huge distances from the water, from the ground even, and is rarely seen in the wild. So again, I should try and say that the right way, or in a better way. It can jump from the water super far, and if it lands on land, it can jump from land elsewhere super far. Now, this all could, why, like, Gyarados is rarely seen and everything, can apply to the theory of deep-sea gigantism. Now, I have talked about deep-sea gigantism before, but I feel like I need to talk about it more in detail, at least in this direct quote from AMHS News. Thousands of meters deep below the ocean's surface, you'll find an overwhelming majority of Earth's largest underwater creatures. This isn't a coincidence. It's a phenomenon known as deep sea gigantism. Creatures living in the deep sea have the tendency to be larger than their counterparts living in shallower waters. Now, this could be because of the different types of external pressures, and considering the water is super easy to make turbulent, there are many creatures within said water that are very sensitive to change and use, very minute things to try and find their prey. So if you have a boat, even if it's not a rudder mechanical boat going across the surface of the water, you're creating a lot of vibrations, ripples, and so on that would otherwise, be indicative of their next meal. Now no longer meaning that, but instead this big metal thing that they can't chew. So, strangely enough, Gyarados I would consider to be one of those creatures. As such, it is best that it stays deep underwater where it can hunt without incredible disturbance. And now, let's paint a really nice picture of what Route 12 looks like. Pidgey live in the tree lines as per usual, feeding on its pick of prey, that being Oddish, Gloom, Venonat, Bellsprout, Magikarp, Krabby, and maybe an occasional Slowpoke tail. The problem it has is that it may get caught off guard by a Weepinbell that it thought was an easy treat, and the Weepinbell eats it instead. Otherwise, it may eat any sleeping Weepinbell it can. Oddish, poor Oddish, lives its life as the prey of the area, as we've previously discussed, trying to run around at night to try and get as far away from its predators as possible, and finding good nutrient-rich soil so that way it can grow and flourish. But when Gloom arrives, it now gets to have its revenge and attract Venonat to it. Maybe a Pidgey, or a desperate Krabby, or a confused Psyduck, and then devour them. Bellsprout and Weepinbell seem to take no prisoners and will eat anything they can justifiably take down. Living within the forest, living within the weeds, wherever it can camouflage itself until it can strike. And then we have Venonat, that very well could just prey on tiny non-Pokemon bugs, I suppose, or it could be taking its fair share of the array of plant Pokemon meals in front of it. But generally speaking, gnats don't damage plants, so Venonat is a bit of an anomaly here. Krabby and Horsey act as they always have, with no new real additions, as Krabby may try to take down a Horsey and eat it, or even go after the unsuspecting Magikarp that may get too close to it, whether the Krabby is moving on land or within the water itself. Psyduck, I'm sure, stays plenty far away from the most trouble that there is, but may on occasion eat or be eaten by our plant friends. Luckily, it does have some psychic power, and with a strong enough headache, it may survive these encounters. And finally, Gyarados. To me, Gyarados is like Snorlax, a beast that can't be stopped and puts a wrench in the ecosystem. Gyarados is top dog and is almost like a restart button, but assuming it stays in the water, it may just try to eat anything it comes across. In this area, it may even keep a consistent diet of Horsey and Magikarp, maybe an unlucky Slowpoke or Psyduck that drifted far from the shoreline, or a Krabby that ventured too far into the deep. I have to note, I have so much of this actually scripted in heavy detail that was all scripted, as I'm sure you saw my eyes go to my script over here, because I just started writing full paragraphs. I really felt myself falling into the writer mindset, knowing that I need to add more detail and fun to this, and I know I add more detail to some of the areas later on as we get evolutions. And honestly, this script visually is kind of a mess that I had to try and fix, but content-wise, I feel so incredibly satisfied with what I've been able to write here and what I'm able to explain, and it only gets better in my eyes. So hopefully it's just getting better to you, and we're gonna keep moving on. Route 13, the maze-like path with a refreshing coastal view. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same. Pidgey, Oddish, Gloom, Venonat, Bellsprout, Weepinbell. But now we added a new top dog predator to the area, Pidgeotto. It is a powerful flyer capable of carrying prey several miles to its nest, and it has amazing vision. It will catch prey such as Execute and Magikarp, and has a territory of more than 60 miles or 100 kilometers that it defends fiercely with its nest at its center. So, I mean, it's eating eggs and and fish. Who would have guessed, right? So while it's sharing its environment with Weepinbell, I'd say there are pretty low chances of it being eaten by one. And it may just leave this area to go hunting far and wide, which affects the surrounding areas, but also explains why it doesn't have a population there, and it's just a quick flyby of a Pokemon. And to kind of add to that, considering we don't see Pidgeotto on the previous route, I really wouldn't write it off. For example, you have a pretty low chance to see bears as you go more south in the United States, or at least like when you're talking population, like more bears in the north in the cold versus less bears in the south in the United States again, but it's not impossible. And, you know, as they run out of food in their preferred habitats, they might go really far south to try and search for whatever they need in order to survive. But all of this doesn't stop there, because we also have Ditto, which is another anomaly, and I mean like a huge anomaly, because it simultaneously fits perfectly into these ecosystems, but also exists outside of the ecosystem depending on it being observed. We have like a weird, almost Schrodinger's Ditto situation here, because it can become any Pokemon, becoming them biologically, so that way they can have children together, ruining the lives of whatever, you know, let's say, what if it was a cardinal? What if it was a cardinal? They mate for life. Do you imagine a Ditto becoming a cardinal, and then they mate, they have children, everything, and the Ditto's like, bye? Like, it's like, my husband, why? I thought you were my love. And the Ditto's like, I wasn't a cardinal to begin with. Ditto don't even like each other and competes to see who can transform better and faster. It stays near civilization and people, and even transforms into cubes in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They can transform pretty much into anything it wants, and copies an opponent's genetic code and rearranges its own cell structure, then turns into a stone at night when it, or whenever else it decides to sleep, so that way it can avoid being attacked. It literally just transforms into whatever it wants as long as it's seen it before, though it may have trouble if it's going from pure memory. And considering Chatot can copy the cry of a Pokemon right in front of it to convince that Pokemon they are the same and avoid a conflict, I can claim that Ditto can just avoid nearly every encounter just by transforming into the Pokemon that is accosting it. So the thing is, with all of this, on top of it all, is that Ditto can't even breed with its own kind, meaning it has its own egg group that it can't even have eggs! So how the heck do they even exist? No, it's not just a failed Mew clone, because in 2016, series director Junichi Masuda, who had been around since Generation 1, said that's not the case. But then, when Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu came out, amongst other stuff, you get the cloning pods under the burned mansion where Mewtwo was created. And they're in there. They spawn in there. It's like one of the, I think they have one of the higher populations there than anywhere else. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Ditto just exists. Nothing is gonna eat it. It isn't gonna eat anything. It's a freaking single cell amoeba that maybe eats some berries and apricorns when it feels like it, but otherwise can just turn into a plant Pokemon, change its cell structure, and chlorophyll it up, absorb that sunlight, and not have to fight anything, not have to deal with anything, not actually be a part of the ecosystem if it doesn't want to be. And I don't know. We're gonna take Ditto and we're gonna whip it out of the ecosystem. It just shouldn't exist in the ecosystem. It doesn't make sense. It's not here. This is just one of those things where it's like, I tried to make sense of something and it doesn't fit. No matter what I do, it does not actually fit. Maybe one day, in one of the games, Ditto will just absorb each other and become the Dittochondria, the powerhouse of the Pokemon cell or something. I don't know. We're going to Route 14. Which is a pleasant coastal road where the breeze blows and waves roar. We get some pineapple and nanap berries here, and then it's actually just the same as before, once again, but without the water Pokemon, so the same as the previous route. Route 15, a path that cuts through the row of trees to come out on the coastline. More pineapple berries here, and once again, same array of Pokemon available as the previous route. But don't worry, once again, we've got plenty of areas to encounter Pokemon still, and plenty of pictures for me to paint for you. Route 16 links to the north side of Pokemon Road, a route that is always bustling. We get a Snorlax here as mentioned previously, but let's talk about the regular residents. Because not only do we have Rattata and Spearow duking it out with each other as before, we now have Raticate and Doduo. Raticate. It has webbed feet that allows it to swim and hunt for prey in the water, it uses its whiskers for balance, and if attacked, it stands up and bares its fangs in an intimidating manner. It will take on larger foes if provoked, and those teeth that it has constantly grow, causing the need for them to gnaw on things to cull the growth, and guess what? They can even just chew through steel. They'll eat anything, even chewing through the walls of houses, and even topple concrete buildings, which is actually kind of insane, considering I'd expect there to be tons of Raticate since there are so many swarms of Rattata. But then again, maybe not, because most of them don't survive to evolve, which would make sense as to why there are so many Rattata. And part of that might have to do with the new predator that just appeared alongside it for the first time since we've been talking about these routes. Doduo, with two identical brains thought to communicate through some sort of telepathy, they work in tandem. Even when one is sleeping, eating, or drinking, the other is actively keeping watch for enemies. They trade shifts every hour or so, only allowing themselves to both sleep if they truly feel safe. Otherwise, both heads have the same genes and battle in perfect sync. It can't fly very well, but it is a powerful runner that can run at 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers an hour. I don't know why we keep hitting that same number over and over again, but when it does run, it leaves powerful footfalls. In fact, actually, it leaves a 4-inch deep footprint behind as it runs. Honestly, since it's only about 86 pounds or 39 kilograms, that means it's running with like some pretty strong force, as the deeper the imprint, typically the heavier the individual, or more force being exerted, typically. It lowers its head to keep balance when running, and lives in open plains, grasslands, and savannas, which is where you'd expect there to be a lot of mice. Makes sense. Doduo does get a little bit complicated, so let's try and break it down to figure out where we can draw reliable info from in order to establish what it eats. It is stated that it was discovered 3 years prior to the original games, and the double head is a recent mutation. So there may have been a pre-evolution where there was only like a single-headed Doduo, maybe? I know there's like the beta Pokemon of that, I'm pretty sure. But despite its name, it has more in common with ostriches than dodos, has some similarities to the moa, which is a flight-lived bird indigenous to New Zealand, the emu, and kind of looks like a kiwi as well. Side note though, how big do you think a kiwi is? Because like, you know, I thought it was like itty bitty little baby, like small, like the size of an actual kiwi. Like, you know, like the fruit compared to the bird. But it's not. It is not itty bitty baby. In fact, it is actually like, you know, instead of it being a foot at most, like I thought, being this sweet little fat baby, it's actually more like the size of a domestic chicken, putting it between 1.5 to 2 feet tall, according to Smithsonian's National Zoo, and of course, depending on the kiwi that you're looking at. Now, if we look at kiwis, seems like it's mostly insects, berries, and plant material that they eat. Thank you, National Kiwi Hatchery. When we look at ostriches, they mainly eat leafy greens, flowering plants, roots, grasses, and succulents. But they will eat fallen fruit or small animals such as mice, lizards, frogs, grasshoppers, and locusts as well. Thank you again, Smithsonian's National Zoo. Same can be roughly said for the emus as well. So we can safely assume that Doduo would eat the greenery around and then catch some Rattata and Raticate as part of its meal on occasion. I'd also say that Doduo and Spearow simply stay away from each other, with Spearow occasionally attacking due to it being very territorial. Kind of similar to red-winged blackbirds that, you know, kind of just attack and go after any other creature in existence because, again, they're evil little monsters. I've been bitten by one. They're not that strong. I'm not going to encourage. Don't go antagonize a red-winged blackbird. Don't. That, you know, just because they don't feel like they bite very strong. Maybe I got lucky and like the 5 or 6 that bit me just kind of, you know, weren't really trying. I don't know. I looked them dead in the eye after it bit me and it was still holding on. I'm like, hey. And it just looked at me and I'm like, no. And then it kind of like tried to bite again. I'm like, no. And it just stood there and I let it go. I let it go. It was part of I was doing some research. So like I was doing research on a marsh and I had to release some blackbirds because they got in with the ducks that we were trying to tag. So there's your story. If you want the full story, I talked about it in my video explaining every single Pokemon professor, so, you know, go give that a watch. Let's move forward, though, to Route 17, an easy path of cycling road running above the sea. We have Raz, Nanab, and Pineapple berries galore, and we have an interesting collection where Rattata, Raticate, Spearow, and Doduo are back, but now we finally get Fearow. It has stayed mostly unchanged for years, being shown to be about the same even in ancient murals, with large wings and great stamina, allowing it to go for long flights without landing, and a long neck and beak to pluck prey from land and water, even known to steal from unwary humans. It can shoot upwards into the air and then dive down to catch its prey, even catching tiny insects that hide underground and circle around the ocean for fish. They live naturally in open habitats with warmer climates, but mainly in wastelands and desolate fields. Kind of like a carrion, you know, vulture even. Now, they do have a pretty small encounter rate here, likely meaning that they are just flying by considering all the water and that there are more Raticate and Rattata here, so they're getting a nice quick meal as they continue on their way. Now, I'm confident it might also occasionally attack Doduo out of general disputes, but Fearow will mainly be feeding on some nice fatty Raticate. Also, wouldn't be surprised if Raticate in turn, alongside Rattata, would swarm and fight back on some of these, like the bird Pokemon or any other Pokemon that might be in the area, and get their own meal in return. Route 18 links to the south side of Pokemon Road, a place where trainers gather looking to battle. Raspberries are here again, but that's again kind of more according to the Let's Go games. This area has the same Pokemon as before, but Spearow and Fearow and Doduo, their encounter rates have increased while Rattata and Raticate rates decreased. This relates to what we talked about before, and Route 17 and 18 just told us a story, and that's why I was holding off, okay? Now, on Route 17, there was plenty of prey, and it increased the predator population, and now that we're on Route 18, there are more predator Pokemon and less prey. We can also suspect that there are more trees now, so it allows more of that, the tree line nesting that might occur, and allows them to easily get to their food where it can't hide away. So maybe even Rattata or Raticate are running up, cycling road to escape this area where they are in a lot more danger. As we move on to Route 19, we have a coastal road littered with rocks due to Cinnabar Islands' volcanic eruption. And it does say coastal, but we're in full water. We do find some pearls here, and now that we're surfing, we're gonna fully consider everything these waters have to offer. We have our collections of Magikarp, Horsey, Psyduck, Slowpoke, Krabby, and Gyarados again, but here we add 3 new additions that we'll talk about before we paint a really nice picture of the Pokemon and how they interact with the environment and each other, starting with Tentacool, otherwise known as what some people call it, the Zubat of the water. The jellyfish Pokemon, made up of 99% water and the remaining 1% being the organ that produces its poison. It absorbs sunlight and refracts it, using the water inside its body to convert it into beam energy. Its tentacles are laced with stinging cells, and the poison is so potent you'd need to go to the hospital immediately if you get stung by it, which is very reminiscent of a man-of-war jellyfish. Now, it isn't a very strong swimmer and just travels around using the ocean's currents throughout the world. And it searches for food while drifting on the surface of shallow seas. They blend in with the water and sometimes wash up on shore and dehydrate, but they're still dangerous despite that. And if you just throw it back in the water, it'll get revived. So you can, if you really want to, grab these things by the head like a trash bag and just, woo, if you want to save it. Now, I will tell you now, Tentacool will not be picky. It will eat anything it can get its tentacles on that won't kill it in return, which there are 2 others that I have a feeling would deflate this little water balloon, one of them being Seadra. With dorsal fins that exude venom so toxic that it causes numbness and fainting in humans, this Pokemon swims in any direction while still facing forward with the use of its fins and tail. It catches prey by trapping them in whirlpools, and after the prey is exhausted from trying to escape, it swallows the prey whole. Nasty little sea snake that it is, even though it's not a snake.
It nests by wriggling in between or anchoring directly to branches of coral under the ocean, and male Seadra take care of the young after the female gives birth. And Seadra are considered vicious, mercilessly attacking anyone who comes near their nest, and during this time, the male's venom becomes thicker and stronger than usual. So, now Horsea has upgraded from just eating bugs and moss and now has focused itself on prey within the water itself. But let's talk about that more after we talk about Kingler. Found on the edges of the water, usually in the ocean, its powerful claws have 10,000 horsepower and can pry open the shells of Shelter and Cloyster. To give you an idea, and I quote from Calculator Academy, horsepower is a unit of power that represents the rate at which work is done. It is traditionally measured as the amount of work required to lift 550 pounds 1 foot in 1 second, or 1 horsepower. This measurement can also be represented in terms of foot-pounds per second. So, 10,000 horsepower, if you run the numbers, it can move 5.5 million pounds in 1 second. Though, despite that power with that big claw, the weight of it actually ends up tiring Kingler out rather quickly after it's waving it around for too long. I would even argue, like Krabby, Kingler is just going to eat anything and everything it can get its little grubby claws on, maybe even each other. So, let's paint the picture of this ecosystem. Magikarp are everywhere, of course, filter feeding plenty, all while Horsea are swimming about near the surface of the water, firing down bugs like anti-aircraft machines. On the surface, we might have the rare drifting Psyduck and Slowpoke as well, but whether it's the surface or deeper into the water, we have a new potential threat, Tentacool. It drifts about, letting its tentacles float about with it. Then when it gets close enough to any of these Pokemon, it attacks, dragging down Psyduck, poisoning it, Magikarp, and Horsea. It might even try with Slowpoke and could succeed, but Slowpoke might fight back with psychic power. And with the area having Horsea as one of the 2 most common Pokemon in the area, that means this is a breeding grounds for the aggressive Seadra. And Seadra will not have its children or the mother of its children be taken from it. It whips up a whirlpool that captures the Tentacruel. The Horsea, having practiced making whirlpools, knows how to escape them, and does so easily. And thanks to its genetics, despite not being partially a poison type like its parents right now, it has some resistance to the poison and will make a full recovery. The Seadra keeps the Tentacruel and any other Pokemon unlucky enough to get stuck inside the whirlpool completely trapped until they are exhausted. Then he, his partner, and even their children get to feast as they learn to eat more than just bugs. Any remaining portions fall to the ground where Krabby, the most common Pokemon in the area, and Kingler take up the extra scraps, fighting each other as they are more solitary creatures looking for their next opportunity for food. They have lots of food anyhow, so they won't quarrel much, as at least Krabby's population is rather high on the sea floor or on the coast itself. But all the commotion doesn't go unnoticed, and a Gyarados swims in, disturbed from the dramatically shifting water. It goes after anything it feels best suited as a punching bag. On some occasions, it stays away from Seadra, having learned its lesson from being poisoned in the past. On other occasions, the Seadra family hides in fear of the rampage, and all Pokemon in the area hope that Gyarados doesn't sink its fangs into them as part of its next rage-fueled dinner run. And ultimately, that rounds out what I'm going to consider one of the most complete ecosystem areas of our water environments within Kanto. It doesn't include every water Pokemon, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that this area felt so complete to me that I could paint a full picture of how everything relates to each other, just as I did with, like, the cave. And I'll admit, again, I had so much fun writing that. Now, I know Shelter isn't here, Cloyster isn't here, Starmie isn't here, and honestly, I'll be real with you. Since I'm not really going to be including the Seafoam Islands, and I'll talk about that later, why that's the case very soon, they're not really here. They're not appearing naturally here. And we know Staryu and Starmie are from space. But, to go back to Shelter, Route 19 and 20 are the same, but if you fish on Cinnabar Island, you can get a Shelter. Its shell is harder than diamond, it does love slowpoke tail, and it is a filter feeder, you know, getting the sand through its body and just filtering out whatever it can. As it is also hunted by Krabby and Kingler, I'm sure maybe there's a rare chance that Gyarados might go after it. Otherwise, most things aren't going to have a very good time being able to get inside the shell because it has that incredibly hard shell, but it's very soft on the inside. In addition, we do have evidence that they move around a decent amount, but they are sticking to those shores of Cinnabar Island, maybe because it's warm and they can filter feed a little bit easier. I'm not entirely sure. In addition to, some of the evidence is that they move around is because we do get pearls in the surrounding areas. So maybe they're just moving around quite a bit. I'm not entirely sure why they aren't fully included in a number of these areas, but we're taking these ecosystems as they are. For now though, before we go to other routes or other islands, let's talk about the Seafoam Islands. This area is going to have a lot going on with 5 floors, and at the bottom of which sits another legendary Pokemon. First floor, we have a mixing of Psyduck and Slowpoke being the most common, followed by Zubat, and for the first time, we get Golbat. Its fangs have hollowed tubes specialized for sucking blood and are thick enough to pierce thick hide, but are unexpectedly fragile. Some are missing fangs as they try to drain Steel-type Pokemon. It's really funny to think that it's just going to go after whatever it can, because it is a greedy Pokemon, as I'll mention soon enough, and will just snap its fangs on the Steel-type, thinking that it could get through. Now, it does feed on both humans and Pokemon, drinking over 10 ounces in one sitting. It is gluttonous, drinking to the point that its own blood type changes to match the prey it feeds on, and it may even become too heavy to fly, leaving itself vulnerable. But it is kind to its own kind and will share the blood with them if they are hungry, including the Zubats. It is nocturnal, found easily in caves, and let's just see how this first floor works then, as Psyduck might like the cold and dark as it eases its headaches, so it wanders in from outside. Slowpoke, on the other hand, is unbothered by the cold, as it is a fatty Pokemon. Yes, I understand it doesn't have the thick fat ability, but it also has easy access to water for fishing right outside, and can just waltz in here when it wants to rest away from the beaming sun. But waiting inside are both Zubat and Golbat colonies. They feed on Psyduck, especially as it doesn't have the incredible tension it needs to release the psychic power. Meanwhile, Slowpoke are too stupid and slow reacting for them to realize that their blood is even being taken before these bats can make their great escape. On occasion, these bats might feed too much and get knocked around by the Psyduck at least, and maybe Slowpoke if it does realize it is being drained after the couple of minutes, you know, that its blood is being taken. So those are probably the only times that the bats here are having trouble. But let's move on to Basement 1F. While the population of Zubat and Golbat stay the same, Psyduck and Slowpoke actually drop. This makes room for their evolutions and an additional Pokemon in the area, Seal. This thick-fatted Pokemon lives on icebergs in frigid ocean waters. The warm fur and thick hide keep it warm in waters as cold as negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which that's the same in Celsius. Negative 40 is where Fahrenheit and Celsius meet. So that's the scary thing. It's that cold. It thrives in the cold environments, becoming more active as the temperature drops, though it does tire in the warmer waters, and it sleeps during the day, hunts late in the day and evening under the sheets of ice that exist. Now, it is a graceful swimmer, but it struggles to move on land, and if it ever needs, it can easily break through ice with the horn that's on its head. As we move into Golduck, Golduck is a fast swimmer capable of outswimming even the most athletic of humans with the assistance of its webbed appendages. Rough seas can't even slow it down, as it'll even rescue people from shipwrecks. It can shoot jets of water from its palms, even using them to propel itself forward. Kind of like put your hands behind you and just boom. The gem on its forehead even glows when it uses psychic powers, or occasionally when it's swimming at maximum speed, which would be kind of cool to see if it's using its psychic powers to envelop itself so it has less drag and goes faster, or even is propelling itself forward by using its psychic energy. Though it was overhunted in the past, as people believed it would give supernatural powers by taking the gem on its head. It typically swims in lakes, hunting fish, and any prey it catches, it first disables, then actually captures it, and then eats it on the shoreline where it would be safer. We'll talk about Slowbro next and put this lore together as it is the majority of what we will find here, and then we'll develop it a little bit more later. Slowbro, evolving after a shelter attaches to its tail as it now tries to suck sweetness from the tail itself. Slowbro no longer feels any pain due to the shelter poison, but while typically lazy and unintelligent, Slowbro apparently becomes inspired whenever the shelter bites down. It is now capable of unleashing powerful psychic attacks, but it is peaceful and prefers not to fight. It now swims to catch prey and lets the shelter feed on scraps. It lives in ponds, lakes, and seashores. So, as we look at Slowbro and Golduck, they have the lowest encounter rate here. I suspect they are simply evolving by chance and will not stay long on this level as their preferred food and environment isn't available here. They may have just evolved as they survived more encounters with Zubat and Golbat ultimately and had the chance to grow, or be bit on the tail in Slowbro's case, of course, which, I mean, I don't know, random shelter got in here, I suppose. Though it is fairly clear that these waters lead deeper. Otherwise, Slowbro would have never evolved without a shelter, again, coming from somewhere. This would also help explain why we see so few seal here, but no real food for it. I also don't imagine there would be many new interactions other than the Zubat and Golbat, leaving Golduck and Slowbro alone as they will fight back and win due to their new, controlled psychic powers. So let's go deeper. B2F. As we go deeper, the Zubat and Golbat population drops, but the Seal, Golduck, and Slowbro population rises. This could be simply because it does get colder as you go deeper into this cave, and the bats are not built to withstand that cold. Otherwise, there's no new speculation to explore here. Then you get into B3F, the motherlode of what's really here, the meat of these caves. I am sticking to what can be encountered through the cave, land, and through surfing. If I were to include any fishing, it kind of skews the results again, as we talked previously, and it gets really weird. Now, we have all the same individuals as the previous lore, but now Seal dominates the land and water as you get 40% on land and 60% when surfing. We also now have Dugong. It is a swift swimmer swimming at speeds of 8 knots, which is about 9 miles per hour. The sharp horn cuts through even the thickest ice floes, and it lives on icebergs adrift in frigid ocean waters, thriving in lower temperatures and being more active in colder weather. It stores thermal energy in its body so it can withstand any low temperature. During the daylight hours, it sleeps on bitterly cold ice or under shallow water. But when night falls and the temperature drops, it becomes a hunter searching for prey. After eating, it sunbathes if it can, which helps its digestion as the body temperature rises. And considering sea lions will eat birds, nothing is really safe here with Seal and Dugong about. I mean, maybe our bats are, but I wouldn't bet on that. Now, we do have a lot of our friends from other places now here. Horsey and Krabby are apparently here as well in decent numbers. I get, some crabs, snow crabs, yeah, sure. And I don't know how Horsey is really surviving this, but here's how this frigid area plays out. Seal and Dugong dominate the area, especially the water, as they hunt down Horsey, Krabby, Psyduck, and Golduck. Maybe Slowpoke and Slowbro if they feel like it. Most of them are fairly helpless, but Golduck can grab Psyduck or even fellow Golduck and escape to land quickly where Seal and Dugong are much more awkward and slow moving. In the chaos, Zubat and Golbat take swipes at any Pokemon it can on land in order to feed, but due to the number of dangerous prey, they have to work together to stay alive or move into the upper floors. Krabby takes any scraps it can, as always, as it sits on the ground underwater, maybe occasionally moving to land, but it doesn't really have it doesn't have a population there. And I'll say it now, it doesn't make much sense that we see Horsey here, as it's not its preferred environment, so maybe large numbers wander in randomly from time to time. But how about we finally get into B4F? Zubat is gone from the area, Golbat stays, and Seal has a 50% encounter rate, with Dugong also increasing to 10%. This lines up perfectly with their information, as this is going to be the coldest level where they can thrive best. Well, at least it's the coldest level above our legendary bird Pokemon Articuno. So we're gonna go lower now as we get into this legendary bird. Articuno essentially creates this ecosystem. Its frigid cold completely changing the cave, freezing it from bottom up as it has made this den its home. It does this by simply flapping its wings, which freezes moisture in the air, and it also prefers cold and isolated locations with permafrost, which it likely just helps keep frozen with its own abilities. So it probably just simply flew in, was freezing all the moisture because we're in a hot area right by the quote-unquote inactive volcano nearby, and there's so much more moisture in the air from all the water and the heat that when it goes into these caves that have a lot of water humidity, it froze everything as it went down and made its home at the bottom, and just by staying there long enough could basically create a permafrost little mini den for itself, and it keeps it that way as it prefers. Now, with it being a legendary Pokemon, kind of like, you know, what should be for other legendaries, if it doesn't eat, I mean, sure, it's legendary, maybe it doesn't need to eat. Otherwise, it likely just eats whatever it pleases after turning these Pokemon into popsicles along the way. Otherwise, again, it's just an agent of the cold, may not even need to eat, and it's just essentially interacting and changing the environment itself, which in turn changes the lives of many Pokemon, as we saw with Zapdos. These legendary birds, these Pokemon, are the environment themselves. They change the ecosystem. They're massive players in this world. Let's get away from the Seafoam Islands and move back across the water towards Cinnabar and enter the Pokémon Mansion. A decrepit, burned-down mansion on Cinnabar Island. It got its name because a famous Pokemon researcher lived there. If you want to know the full story of the mansion, I highly recommend you check out my video explaining every single Pokemon professor. And yes, I covered the ones in the side games, the anime, and more. I did not miss a single one, and I even talked about their assistants. And, I mean, obviously, maybe when Legends ZA comes out, I'll have to talk about another Pokemon professor separately, but that's a whole other situation. Back to the mansion's ecosystem, as while it is man-made, since it had been burnt down, it has since been reclaimed by Pokemon, potentially even creating some of the Pokemon itself. It is grouped by floors 1F to 3F, as they have the same spawns, and then basement 1F has different encounters. So, on 1F to 3F, we see Growlithe and Vulpix again, but there's also Rattata and Raticate. This is fairly simple. They're a bit more resistant to the ashen environment or less than favorable health conditions. Growlithe still takes the cake here, as I'm sure it would just add Raticate to its hunting list, and so would Vulpix, I'm sure. Maybe Vulpix would have to try and escape here or there, or Growlithe would have to escape here or there. I mean, they're probably attacking in swarms. Question mark. It's a couple of different opportunities. But here we have 4 new Pokemon that can cause some major problems. The Grimer and Coughing lines have arrived. Grimer, it constantly oozes a bacteria-rich fluid from all parts of its body, and if any body part breaks off, they just become a new Grimer. If they combine with other Grimer, they create new poisonous compounds, and it can squeeze into any space or crevice with relative ease, allowing it to go through sewage pipes and feed off the filthy wastewater as it needs bacteria to survive. If all the bacteria runs out, it dies. It is found in polluted lakes and streams, as well as within cities and factories where trash and industrial waste can be found, and it lets off a putrid stench. Apparently it was also born, and I saw this in Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Black and White entries, that it was born when sludge was exposed to X-rays from the moon. Okay. But then we have Muck. It is a living biohazard, at verbatim from Pokemon, that also leaks toxins that instantly kill all plant life it touches, even if it gets within proximity of them. Not touching them, proximity. It will die. Do not touch it. Even a small brush can lead to severe sickness from this Pokemon. And the effects of this Pokemon, as previously stated, can leave the landscape barren for 3 years. and it readily consumes nearly any waste or refuse generated by people and Pokemon alike. Now let's move over to coughing and wheezing, and then I'm going to paint you a real disgustingly pretty picture of this mansion. With coughing, it creates gases within its body by mixing toxins with garbage, producing more gas in higher temperature environments. I mean, it's a burned mansion. There's going to be quite a bit of gas, assumedly. The gases are malodorous, bad odors, and cause sniffles, coughs, and teary eyes to those around them. The gas is also lighter than air, allowing coughing to float. It'll also produce more toxic gas when irritated, as it expels it from the holes in its body, and that gas can be ignited by fire or electricity. It feeds on the fumes of raw, rotting trash in gas dumps and polluted air. It itself, being very, very full of gas, can overexpand and explode without warning, or even be induced to explode with direct fire or electricity. But finally, we move into wheezing. Said to form when poisonous gases pool and two or more coughing fuse over many years. Alternatively, a sudden mutation can cause them to form from coughing. Each head contains a different toxin, mixing gases together by inflating one head and deflating the other. When the gases mix, it becomes more toxic and putrid. And of course, the gases can be used to make top-grade perfume by extreme dilution methods. It lives in urban areas seeking dirty and unkept houses where it will dig through trash at night. It feeds on the dust, microorganisms, and especially the gases emitted by garbage and toxic waste. Its body expands and smells worse upon inhaling more poisonous gases. So, let's break down this section of the burned mansion. The mansion is desolate, full of trash of all sorts. Rattata and Raticate moved in first, trying to live and survive wherever they can, as they seek shelter from the outside, or they may hunt while swimming. But while they can withstand harsh environments, this harsh environment ends up creating Grimer and coughing from all the pollution sitting for so long. These two creatures continue to devour and produce waste, and any Rattata and Raticate that exist only create more waste with the sheer amount of bacteria-rich droppings that they leave behind. Vulpix and Growlithe, looking for an easy meal, chase Rattata and Raticate inside, creating more destruction with their own flames. But they don't stay long, as our toxic friends dominate the building. And after years of being abandoned, more ash and dust developing, the toxic miasma builds up with the droppings and everything being left behind, to the point where the levels of them become unbearable, at least to normal life forms, because this actually becomes the perfect breeding ground for toxic gases and repulsive bacteria, resulting in both wheezing and muck to form and thrive, just to repeat the cycle indefinitely until the mansion one day is either cleaned up or collapses. Now, we're going to talk about B1F, but, you know, the basement, but nothing really changes except for one thing. Technically two, because, you know, the amount of Rattata in the area drops, and Ditto takes the 10% as it exists in the basement, and we've already talked about this anomaly, so there's nothing new to say here about the smiley face little monster it is. So how about we take a trip across the water to Mount Ember? I will say now that I am going to skip the Seafoam Islands themselves, as I don't want to ignore the influence of future Pokemon from later generations on the area, but I also don't want to skip around the routes or exclude them or whatever it is, because I think it would just be best to keep everything about them together rather than split them up. I'll have to decide whether or not they need to be included as part of Generation 2 or Generation 3's explanations, or, I mean, even if you, I don't know if you even care about the islands themselves. I mean, that would be the routes, the treasure island, everything related to the Seafoam Islands. It's a whole thing in and of itself, right? Just let me know in the comments what you think might be best, because I have to make that judgment call eventually, and it would be nice to have a little bit of input for that. What I won't skip, though, is just the brief mentioning of Tentacruel. Tentacruel itself, evolving from Tentacool, is much larger, and they live more out in the ocean, which is a really good thing, because with Tentacruel, it's such a large jellyfish and an active hunter, and it's an incredibly deadly hunter, to the point where if you notice while you're out on the water that there's no other fish in the area, it is because hordes of Tentacruel have actually completely wiped out all the fish and other Pokemon in that area, eating everything. They are a force to be reckoned with. They are ecology destroyers. They are a factory reset. And honestly, I don't even know if Gyarados could take on a swarm of them. It might. Hyper Beam, sure, but these things also have beams of their own. It gets nasty. So, how about we move on to Mount Ember instead? Supposedly an inactive volcano, however, there are persistent reports that the peak blazes with fire at night. In the base area, we have Spearow, Fearow, Machop, Geodude, and Graveler. But they're in fairly low numbers as we've made room for 3 new Pokemon. One of them being Ponyta. Only an hour after being hatched from an egg. That feels wrong. It feels very wrong. Horses don't hatch from eggs. I mean, yeah, I get it, it's Pokemon, but still. This horse has fire appear all over its body an hour after hatching from an egg. It can leap over tall buildings, even the Eiffel Tower apparently, in a single bound, but the newborns are weak runners and can barely stand. It strengthens itself and becomes faster by chasing after its parents and jumping over grass that grows taller by the day. It can even control its flames so it doesn't harm others, and tends to live in grasslands, plains, mountains, or anywhere else it can run freely. Apparently its hooves are 10 times stronger than diamonds. Of course, everything's stronger than diamonds. Everything's related to diamonds. Diamonds! Diamonds! Oh! Girl's best friend! Oh, they're so rare! Oh! Shut up. They're not. They're not rare. Diamonds. Whatever. Anywho, we also get its evolution here as it comes in contact with firestones that naturally occur here. Rapidash. Able to run at roughly 150 miles per hour or 240 kilometers per hour, chasing everything that moves in hopes of racing it. Apparently in the modern age, it actually will even run alongside cars because it really loves how fast they go. It can reach top speed in 10 steps. And in full gallop, it barely touches the ground, which, I mean, I think regular horses are like that also, to be fair. And the faster it runs, the longer the swaying flames of its mane will become, even sparkling in a full gallop. Really happy little horse Pokemon, not really little. Unicorn horse flame Pokemon. It lives in grasslands, but can be seen on mountains. And the last Pokemon of this specific area that we'll talk about is Magmar. Its body temperature is nearly 2200 Fahrenheit or 1200 Celsius, giving the body an orange glow. It hates cold places and typically resides in and around active volcanoes where it is born from. It is known to spit scorching flames to establish a warmer environment for itself, and in battle, it'll spout flames from everywhere to intimidate foes and incinerate its surroundings. Well-trained ones can block electric-type attacks with superheated air, but will quickly retreat if outmatched using a fiery camouflage. It will hunt down anyone who manages to defeat it and heals wounds and weariness by soaking in lava. Although it often also accidentally burns its prey to a crisp. Uh-oh, there goes dinner. So, let's put this area together. I love painting these pictures. Oh, it's my favorite part. It's so much fun. The volcano is incredibly hot, providing home to specialized Pokemon that can withstand the heat momentarily, or can completely withstand it. The Spearow and Fearow fly by, led by the Fearow as there are more of them. They strike at the Machop and Ponyta in the area, aiming to get a good meal. The Machop are simply here to train in the heat, lifting Geodude and Graveler, and are aware of the threats here, including Magmar, and enjoy the challenge. Because Magmar will take on every Pokemon except for Geodude and Graveler. It wouldn't have too much trouble with Ponyta, even though they have the highest population here. But that is because of the few Rapidash residing in the terrain that are having offspring in this environment where they originally thought there would be less predators. These Rapidash fight back the Magmar, but they will come back on occasion to fight anyway and might get a victory here or there. It honestly feels like this area would have constant fighting between Fearow and Magmar, but the rate of Magmar is equal to Rapidash, so it may not be as terrifying or common as I once thought. I'm also fairly sure that the Geodude and Graveler wouldn't be opposed to helping our more vulnerable Pokemon here. From here, we move up, and Summit Path rooms 1 and 3 only have Machop and Geodude, so they're just training rooms for the Machop. We also do have room 2, which adds Machoke and Graveler. So the Machop evolved and so did the Geodude, so it's just another little training room for them. It would be fun to see if in return for letting Machop or Machoke lift Geodude and Graveler up, they help break down rocks for them to eat. That'd be a nice little, ecosystem right there. And finally, we hit the summit with Geodude and Graveler only, where they do what they've done before. And honestly, there's nothing else of real interest here, as it is the same thing over and over throughout all the paths. And while, yes, Slugma and Magcargo are here in the upper paths, I'm gonna save them for the future region breakdowns, as it'll be more interesting than here, as they just kind of get to exist for the most part, unless Graveler gets antsy and really wants to eat some Magcargo shell. At the top, though, living within the lava and the magma of the volcano, we have Moltres. It sheds embers with every flap of its wings. And the reason it lives here is because it can dip into the magma of an active volcano and heal itself. It actually migrates from the south with the coming of spring, and is said to bring early springtime to cold lands. So, it's another legendary that is said to shape the environments, but this feels like it's not as powerful for the specific area, but rather is a living global warming wherever it goes, bringing again that early spring. Route 21, a coastal road where the only threat might be the volcano on the horizon. We're getting closer to the end, and scriptwriting Krillic wanted you to know that he was getting incredibly tired but trucking on. It's just what's written there, I don't know what to say. But there is nothing of note here on land or water, except for a single Pokemon residing by itself in the grass. Tangela, a plant-like Pokemon covered in blue seaweed-like vines that obscure its face. It is unknown what Tangela looks like without them, and those vines are covered in fine hair and are always growing. It can ensnare and entangle anything that moves too close with its vines, and the vines constantly jiggle and sway, unnerving enemies and causing a tickling sensation if ensnared. Though the vines will snap off easily and painlessly if the target pulls on them, so those targets can just quickly escape. The vines have a refreshing flavor and scent, and it can usually be found in temperate grasslands, often found swinging on tree branches using its vines, which is very cute. It does have chlorophyll, so it likely primarily gets its food from photosynthesis, although it can be an opportunistic feeder if any of our water Pokemon get too close. Maybe at one point it somehow ambushed all the Pokemon on land, and that's why there's only Tangela here, and it created a monoculture. A couple different theories you could throw out. Now, we do have the same array, the same full array as other water routes close to here, but I would assume that it would only have a chance of catching a stray Magikarp or Slowpoke if it really wants to. Any other Pokemon would easily get away or not even get close to it in the first place. And honestly, if there was a Krabby that rolled up here, it's decimating that Tangela without a doubt in my mind. Despite the fact that there's a grass water disadvantage, I'm fairly sure it's gonna rip it apart. Route 22. A paved road that leads straight to the Pokemon League. We're back to the usual being before we even had our little fancy fishing rods. So the only ones I'm going to consider existing in these small ponds or around them would be Rattata, Spearow, Mankey, and Magikarp, all of which have been covered before and are in the same restricted level range I had previously set. So let's move on to our final routes before Victory Road. And I'll tell you right now, we've got plenty of new additions, and the picture I can paint of this area it's my favorite. It's my favorite, it's really cool. So without further ado, let's jump into Route 23. A mountain path where only the strongest trainers may pass. The berries we find here are Raz, Leppa, Citrus, and Lum. Pokemon we have that were already talked about with their interactions include Spearow, Fearow, Ekans, Sandshrew, and Mankey. Whatever. We'll add a reminder, though, that Fearow likely feeds on anything that moves, meaning Ekans is definitely on the grocery list, with Mankey being an occasional meal. And a reminder that Mankey will stick to its fruits based on its food preferences, and knowing there are plenty for it to choose from, which can create a lot of conflict. But with Sandshrew and Ekans battling as much as they do to decide who eats who, we get their evolutions. Let's begin with Arbok, as Arbok is fit with a hood that has been noted to have 20 different patterns throughout the species, and it uses the face to intimidate its foes into paralysis. It coils around opponents and crushes them, even being able to flatten steel oil drums. And then it poisons the target to finish them off before eating them. It will even create eerie sounds from its mouth to intimidate any enemies further. Rumor has it that any part of its body that is cut off, excluding its head, can be regrown in a few weeks. Which, that's insane for a snake. It can detect vibrations and can survive in aquatic environments and is incredibly territorial. It's like every snake pulled into one. It lashes at intruders with long fangs tipped with deadly venom and will chase down prey or opponents until its last breath, as it is incredibly vengeful. It makes its home in grassy savannas and plains, but it also is found in forests and desolate wastelands alongside Ekans. It preys on Pidgey and Spearow eggs alongside any other Pokemon smaller than itself, and when it sleeps, it keeps the pattern on display to ensure Pokemon don't approach it. Next up is Sandslash. It has a tough, dry hide and 2 massive claws as primary slashing weapons that are also used for burrowing. The claws and spikes on its back can break off, but grow back quickly, even being shed regularly, actually. They become harder and smoother in drier areas, and it can also curl into a ball, allowing it to attack or escape, protected from heat stroke, and guard its soft underbelly. It is adept at climbing trees and will ambush enemies from above, and it will climb trees to rest at night, and slash berries to feed Sandshrew below. Once again, I ask that you bear with me. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. We have a number of other Pokemon that live here on land or water before I can paint you my favorite picture of this entire video. But having been this far, I have a feeling that you can already start seeing these interactions and how they evolve and how this is going to work, and it's so cool. But how about I talk about Primeape next, which is easily angered, and even the slightest glance of eye contact will make it furious. Interesting, since there are some Primeapes where if you make eye contact or bare your, smile, you are baring your fangs, and they get aggressive. When it is enraged, blood circulation is boosted. The muscles get stronger then at the cost of its own intelligence. And it can also convert that anger into pure energy to attack with. It has sturdy vessels in its brain that keep it healthy despite constant anger, and it will chase anyone who upsets it and will not stop until it is caught up to them. Doesn't matter if it just woke up from a nap or if it's in its Pokeball, it is an angry boy out to fight. Though, because of all this anger, it does end up dying, and it looks rather peaceful after death, potentially due to its rage transcending and leaving its physical form to become something new. Which we can't talk about here, as that doesn't exist in this generation. It also has a fondness for bananas and lives in the mountains. Pretty straightforward. Angry boy is angry. Let's take a dive into the water now. The usual culprits are here: Magikarp, Psyduck, Slowpoke, and Gyarados, and now we add in Goldeen, which is very aggressive and will likely only ever eat Magikarp, and maybe it'll eat, maybe it'll try eating a couple other things, but I doubt it'll have any real success, and it might even get eaten by Gyarados. But we also have an old friend fitting in here that it might also try to eat, which is Poliwag, definitely sitting as prey. So after going through some tough times, from being kind of pushed around by a lot of these Pokemon, it evolves into Poliwhirl, sweating outside the water to keep its skin in great froggy quality and to slip away from enemies' grasp, and using that spiral belly to put others to sleep. It can move on land but prefers freshwater ponds and lakes where it has fewer natural enemies. It feeds on bug and fish Pokemon, leaving the water to capture bugs and sinking back into the water where it's safe. I imagine if it doesn't fully take down that bug Pokemon, it's grabbing it, and you're just going, oh, no, 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 just dragging that bug into the water, drowning it, which is terrifying. Although I know Araquanid, whatever the heck the spider water thing Pokemon is, that one drowns its prey. That's scary. So let's put this location together. This land is the culmination of Kanto and its environments, and while it doesn't have every Pokemon, it has a wide variety on both land and water, and this creates conflict between predator, prey, and the availability of resources. These waters have been around for quite some time, maybe their larger size brought on by all the melt from the mountains as winter changes to spring. This allows Pokemon like Magikarp, Poliwag, and Goldeen to freely exist. Though Goldeen may get aggressive and take nips at Magikarp and Poliwag, it isn't entirely necessary as they can be filter feeders. Spearow, flying overhead, notice how abundant the fish are here, and dive in, staying long term to establish themselves within the trees nearby. The poor Psyduck and Slowpoke just seem to wander in here as always, never really staying, but at least they can get a bite to eat if they survive their time here. Because new predators are noticing the commotion. One in particular, Ekans, finds that the nests of Spearow have plenty of eggs due to the sheer amount of Spearow in the area and can take some for themselves. Unfortunately, this also means Ekans builds a population and may even try to eat each of our water Pokemon we've named, with exception to Slowpoke potentially. Mankey might run down the mountain from time to time in anger, seeing the trees it gets its fruit from being rummaged through, but it couldn't do too much against the high-flying Spearow. It can only do so much to the poisonous Ekans, so it takes its rage out where it can and runs home. The increased number of Ekans attracts Sandshrew, who takes its chances with Spearow flying about and will take Ekans for its own prey. Now we've introduced a lot of conflict for resources and general interactions. To counteract that, the most effective Pokemon, or affected Pokemon, begin evolving. In this case, stuck between a colony of Spearow and a bag of Sandshrew, Ekans evolves into the terrifying Arbok, showing off its pattern and scaring every Pokemon away. This makes it the king of the route once more. Sandshrew now fear it despite their type advantage, as Arbok is simply too strong naturally. But the new pressure of Arbok instills both Sandshrew and Mankey to evolve. This is because even Mankey can't get near its beloved fruit, and as such it grows angrier to the point of evolution, fueled by rage and vengeance. So, Primeape bursts through the trees, and fights between it and Arbok happen from time to time. The victor may go either way despite the type disadvantage on Primeape. But the real victor of the day is Sandshrew's evolution, Sandslash. With great mobility and great ability to protect itself, it is able to easily dispatch Arbok without fear thanks to its thick hide and sharp claws. Though, despite a common enemy, Primeape still attacks it on occasion as Sandslash takes fruit for Sandshrew from the trees that Primeape likes, and might even still take some eggs from Spearow on occasion. This all has evoked so much pressure on Spearow now that it finally evolves into Fearow, who will not hesitate to fight anything in the area, being vicious and strong, and eats everything it battles. Though Arbok still holds a chance, and Sandslash will burrow away to safety. When we look at the water, they've all been pretty easy pickings. Poliwag gets bullied the most as even Goldeen attacks it, so it evolves into Poliwhirl, where it can grab a Sandshrew on occasion, but otherwise it still struggles with all the competition. All until Magikarp gets kicked one too many times, and we get the rampaging Gyarados to come in and reset the cycle all over again as it hyper beams the lands, going on a rampage and destroying everything, displacing water, creating new habitats as part of the mountain gets destroyed. Then, satisfied, it leaves to larger waters nearby. And there is your picture of this route. I know I've said it before, but this may have been my favorite thing that I've gone through on this channel so far, and I've had so much fun, and we're not done yet because we have our last ecosystem to talk about, Victory Road. A tunnel situated on Route 23, it earned its name because it must be traveled by all trainers aiming for the top. We do find tiny and big mushrooms inside of the rocks, and we also get some familiar faces that stand before other powerful Pokemon and trainers as they face their own hardship, allowing them to evolve. We have Zubat, Golbat, Arbok, Machop, Geodude, and Onix. And for one last time in this video, I ask that you allow me to explain each of our resident Pokemon here, and then I will paint our final picture for you. Because now we see Machoke. Fitting, as it even wears a championship belt of its own that regulates its strength, only removing it when it's facing a truly powerful opponent. It is a Pokemon of immense strength with muscles as hard as steel, able to lift extremely heavy objects with one finger, and it never gets tired. This Pokemon is found in the mountains where it trains daily. Next up is not even Cubone, but rather Marowak. The skull now fused with its head, it swings its bone club with ferocity. The bones it collects coming from a hidden graveyard. Despite its small size, its body is as sturdy as armor. And it has gained all this strength after overcoming the grief of its mother's passing. Adept in combat, the bone is both weapon in close combat and ranged as it's used as a boomerang. It now seeks vengeance on the one that tormented it when it was just a Cubone, when it was weak and timid. It pounds on boulders to carry messages and lives in mountains to test its skills. So allow me to paint the final ecosystem picture for you. This cave was first naturally created by Onix, who live here as the most common Pokemon you will find, but they are often left alone currently as they are too powerful and large. Zubat make their home in the cave first, an easy decision to find safety from the burning sunlight. But it isn't long after this that we start to find Geodude as well, where they can easily leave the cave and be at the bottom of the mountain, where they can find some rocks to eat that have been broken down by Machop high on the mountain. These Machop will occasionally enter the cave, but have trouble with the Zubat, so they can't stay super long. On occasion, Arbok and Sandslash wander in. They might be looking for an easy meal, as they can both reach the Zubat when they're least suspecting it. This puts pressure onto Zubat, and occasionally causes them to evolve into Golbat to fend off their predators in their dens. They are small in number though, so it's not incredibly common. Oddly enough though, a Cubone somehow finds its way in and serves as a quick and tasty treat, not lasting long in the slightest. The Machop in the cave have been training plenty, and are taking more chances with their life, really testing their mettle. This results in it evolving into Machoke, who only continues to test its skills against any Pokemon that crosses it, even Onix. After some more time, a Marowak wanders into the cave, furious. The etches of salt stain its mask as its tears have dried up, and it faces the monsters that took its mother, and it gets its vengeance. After getting that vengeance, it now sits in the cave, making friends with Machop, Machoke, and occasionally Geodude and Onix, as they seem to dominate the cave and would get along decently enough. After that, you reach the league itself. Congratulations, champion! You made it to the end of the video. This was a ton of fun. And I would love, genuinely love, to do this for every region in Pokemon. So, honestly, whether the video does well or not, I'm gonna happily spend hours poring over everything region by region. If the video does super well, I'm just gonna make the next one sooner. Because I want to do this. I want the video to do well, because that's just nice to see. But I just want to do this because it was fun, it was educational to me, and it made me realize just how interconnected everything really is, way more so than I had originally thought. I was taking a jump. I was like, oh, we'll see how this works out. And I found out so much and how much it actually works here. And whether it was thought out on purpose or not, it works. So, again, if this video just does incredibly well, I'll make the next one sooner. Otherwise, the next video I am going to be working on is explaining every single ghost-type Pokemon, because we're about to be in October, baby. Maybe it'll release really soon. We'll see how that plays out. Either way, thank you so much for watching. And as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!